court wants to tell us when the court wants to discuss it.
No, I want to proceed with the jury, and we've been waiting for almost 30 minutes for the juror to arrive because, or she's indicated that she was late because of traffic, and now we're ready, and I certainly don't want to delay that in any way.
Two quick issues then. On the tape, which I have now listened to, Mr. Goodrow indicates that he had some conversation with Mr. Stevens about molestation, and I believe the defense wants to ask Mr. Stevens about that. Our position on that would be Mr. Rand, what do you do for a living, please?
I'm a freelance journalist.
Are you familiar with the Shield law?
Yes, I am.
And did you play a portion of an audio tape of an interview between yourself and Mr. Goodrow last night on Channel 9 News?
Yes, I did.
Do you have a copy of the tape with you today?
Yes, I do.
Is that a tape of the entire conversation you had with Mr. Goodrow?
Yes, it is.
How long is the tape?
Well, actually, our interview was over 2 different days, and there's about 2.5 hours of tape.
All right, you have 2.5 hours with you today?
No, I did not.
All right, how long would it take you to get all 2.5 hours?
I would have to return to my office, which is about a 40-minute drive away.
Okay. The portion of the tape that you have today, how much of the 2.5 hours is it?
It's about 1 hour.
All right. Your Honor, at this time, I have not heard the tape. I understand. Let me ask you a question, Mr. Rand. You played part of this tape from Ms. Lansing, is that correct?
That's correct.
And when was it you played her the tape?
It was in, let's see, approximately, I believe sometime in May or maybe the end of April of 1993.
So that was this year.
Yes.
Did you also play portions of the tape from anyone from the team of Mr. Menendez?
No.
Okay. Now, what was your purpose in playing the tape from Ms. Lansing?
I am writing a book for Simon & Schuster, and in the course of my research, I interview many different people. So I was trying to do some research about some of the topics that were raised by Mr. Goodrow. And so I approached Ms. Lansing and asked for an off-the-record interview regarding some of the information in my interview.
Did you ever come to the prosecution with the same information and ask for comment?
No, I didn't.
Why not?
Because I understood that the prosecution was not doing interviews. I had spoken to Mike Petula a number of times and asked for interviews with the prosecution. I was told they were not doing interviews until after the trial.
Do you remember interviewing me?
Yes.
Okay, and do you remember during that interview, you told me that the prosecution had a better witness than I think it was Craig Signorelli? Remember
Yes.
telling me that? You remember me asking you who that witness was?
Yes,
Remember you telling me you wouldn't tell me?
that's correct.
Okay, but you did make this information available to the defense, is that correct?
Which information are you speaking of?
About Donovan Goodrow,
Which specific information?
the tape.
I didn't play an entire tape. I played a very small portion of a tape.
How much money are you getting for writing this book?
We're not going to object to this. I think this is really irrelevant enough to King.
All right, objection sustained.
Okay, Mr. Rand, how come you never played that for the prosecution?
I'm going to make the same objection. It's irrelevant. How come?
Objection overruled.
I was told that I approached the press information officer for the district attorney's office and had asked a number of times since my return to California last year for interviews with with yourself and with Mr. Kuriyama, and was told that interviews were not available.
Did you tell any of those people the kind of information that you had on the Donovan Goodrow?
No,
So you just asked generally for an interview, is that correct?
that's correct.
Your Honor, at this time, I would ask for access to the tape. I don't know if it's appropriate to take the court's time to play the entire tape, but before we conclude with Mr. Goodrow and send him on his way, I would like to hear the entire tape, and not only the one that's here in court today, but the other hour and a half that Mr. Rand has.
Well, let's get some more information about what this tape is, how it was created, and what's on it.
All right, the 2.5 hours that you have taped was, I believe you indicated, taken over a period of 2 days, is that correct?
That's correct.
What portion of the 2.5 hours deals with the area of abuse, be it sexual or physical?
I would say it's about 5 minutes.
Okay, is that part of the portion, or the portion that was on television last night, part of this 5 minutes?
The portion that was on television was approximately 15 seconds out of that 5 minutes.
All right, do you have that particular part of the tape cue?
No, I do not.
All right, could you find it if I gave you a tape recorder for 5 minutes?
Yes?
All right, may I approach, please?
Well, let's not do it now. Go ahead and ask other questions.
All right, now, as we indicated, and I don't have a transcript of what was on television, but is it your contention that, that Mr. Goudreau told you that the defendants have been sexually abused?
Yes.
All right, now, in the portion of the tape that we viewed, it appears that you were asking him a number of leading questions, is that correct?
I asked him a number of questions. That's what a reporter does.
All right, and if those questions, then you would not characterize as leading, is that correct?
Objection, Your Honor, this is just argumentative.
Overall. Overall.
You can answer the question.
Could you repeat the question?
You would not characterize the questions you asked of Mr. Goudreau, which were played on Channel 9 News, as leading, is that correct?
No, it was in the context of an anecdote he was telling me about Lyle Menendez complaining about Jose Menendez sexually abusing Eric and Lyle.
All right, and that was contained in a portion that was on television?
That's correct.
What was your motivation in going to Channel 9 News last night?
Objection, Your Honor, irrelevant.
Overall.
Why did you do it?
It was Mr. Goudreau had been a witness, and it was a newsworthy event. And they asked if they could. They knew I had some information and asked if they could interview me.
Were you interested in garnering publicity for your upcoming book?
No, I wasn't, Ms. Bazanich. My book will not be released until probably next spring or summer, so I have nothing to gain by doing an interview. A number of reporters have asked to interview me because of my experience of spending almost 4 years researching this story.
You have a financial interest in the outcome of this case, don't you?
I'm a reporter and I work for a living.
And you have a financial interest in the outcome of the case.
No,
Do you have other interviews of other prosecution witnesses that you would provide to us?
no.
You
As
have-
a reporter, I will stand behind the California Shield Law and do not wish to reveal unpublished material.
Do you in fact have interviews with other witnesses for the prosecution in this case?
Yes,
And you are refusing to give that to the prosecution, is that correct?
yes.
Why is it you will give information to the defense and not the prosecution?
I didn't give information. What I was doing was an interview. In the course of an interview, sometimes you reveal information. It's the same thing that I believe prosecutors and police do, that sometimes you reveal information to gain other information. That is what I was doing.
Are you a police officer?
No, I'm a
Objection, Your
reporter.
Honor, this is just argumentative.
All right, but let's get back to what I said.
All right,
How was this tape generated, circumstances of it, absolutely.
where were you when you had this conversation with Mr. Goudreau?
In his apartment in New York City.
And did he consent to the interview with you?
Yes, he did.
And did he know it was being taped recorded?
Yes, the tape recorder was on the table.
What were you doing when you were interviewing him? What was your purpose in interviewing him?
My purpose in interviewing him was in the course of the research for my book for Simon & Schuster. I have interviewed over 300 people. Mr. Goudreau was one of those 300 people.
So the purpose of your interviewing was in preparation for,
In research for my book, I interviewed Mr. Goudreau.
and you were working exclusively on your book at that point.
That's correct. I signed a contract with Simon & Schuster in October of 1991.
All right, so you were working on the book gathering information, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and aside from what was on television last night, what else did Mr. Goudreau tell you about this area of sexual abuse?
I do not wish to go into unpublished material.
Your Honor, at this time, the people would ask that entire 5-minute portion be revealed to the prosecution. It appears to me that you can't waive part and not all.
Well, let's get to some specifics here. Did you play 5 minutes for the people on Channel 9 News?
No, I played 20 seconds.
Okay, and that's all you played for the people at Channel 9?
That's correct.
How much did you play for the defense?
Approximately, I'm not sure, it was maybe about 8 to 10 minutes. I don't recall exactly.
All right, that 8 to 10 minutes include this portion that was played on television last night.
Yes, it did.
All right, and the conversation you had more recently with Mr. Goudreau, was that tape recorded?
No, it was not.
And did you go into the specifics with Mr. Goudreau of your testimony in regards to alleged statement made to him by Lyle Menendez being molested?
I don't wish to go into that. It's unpublished material, and it deals with a source.
All right, the source being Mr. Goudreau,
Correct.
the same source that you disclosed to the world on Channel 9 News last night.
I disclosed a very limited portion of information.
All right, and you feel that you qualify under the California Shield Law?
Yes, I do.
All right, and is your lawyer en route to argue that matter?
He is in court this morning, but he would be available after lunch.
And what is your lawyer's name?
Tony Glassman.
All right, well, I'll permit counsel to arrive and argue the matter regarding the,
I was just served with a subpoena at 10 minutes of 9 this morning, so I had no possibility of notifying him in advance.
well, based upon what you did last night, it certainly wouldn't have been a surprise that you would be a witness today, or based upon the nature of the examination yesterday, it wouldn't have been a surprise that you'd be a witness today, and one could have anticipated this event occurring. But I'll permit Mr. Rand to obtain counsel to represent him on this matter, since the potential is that he is to be ordered to disclose this material, and if not, be subject to contempt. So, number one, I'll order you to appear back here at 1:30 with all of the tape, not just the 1 hour that you brought here, but all of the tape of Mr. Goudreau's conversation with you and with your counsel. All right. Okay. Any further questions of Mr. Rand at this point?
Nothing further. Not at this point, Your Honor.
Okay. And Mr. Rand will be ordered to be returned at 1:30. You are excluded from the courtroom since you are a witness and or potential witness, and ordered to return at 1:30.
Glen Stevens,
Spell your last name, please.
Stevens.
Mr. Stevens, you were a friend of Lyle Menendez's at Princeton University starting in the spring of 1989, is that correct?
Yes,
And you continued to be his friend probably up until July or August of 1990, is that correct?
yes,
In conjunction with your knowledge of this case, have you ever been interviewed by a reporter named Bob Rand?
yes, that's correct.
Did you see Mr. Rand just leave the courtroom?
Yes.
Did Mr. Rand ever tell you any information about any kind of sexual abuse or physical abuse in this case?
Well, no, he just had told me a story about Eric and Lyle having taken baths with their father when they were very young. And he had made it explicitly clear that it was nothing inappropriate, that they were very young. And he said, well, I've taken showers with my father when I was young, and I'm sure you have. And that's the impression that I was given when told this story.
Okay, so Mr. Rand told you this information, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Did you ever hear that information from Lyle Menendez while you were his friend?
No.
Did you ever impart that information to anyone?
Yes, I've spoken about it a few times with Donovan Goudreau.
All right. Have you and Donovan ever specifically discussed the allegations or the idea that Mr. Menendez sexually or physically abused his children? I don't mean in the last 2 days. I mean before coming to California to this testimony.
Well, we had heard rumors, so we had discussed it, yes. We discussed the whole case at length on several occasions. So, yes, I do remember talking about it, but not the specifics.
So you have spoken about the topic of sexual abuse with Mr. Goudreau, is that correct?
Yes.
Did Mr. Goudreau ever tell you that Lyle Menendez had informed him that Lyle or his brother had been sexually abused by the father?
No, he did not.
And do you have any recollection of specifically discussing this bathing incident with Donovan Goudreau?
Yes, I remember specifically discussing it with him, but I cannot remember when or where, in what context it was discussed.
I have nothing further to add.
Ross?
Mr. Stevens, you said that you had heard rumors with regard to the sexual abuse of Lyle and Eric. Is that correct?
Yes.
And from whom had you heard these rumors?
Well, Bob Rand had told me about this bathing incident, and like I said, he didn't say anything that it was inappropriate, but I think that spawned some news reports about the possibility of
Hold on a second.
Poor things.
And I believe Dominic Dunn had written an article that I read in Vanity Fair where it discussed the possibility of such things.
Okay, so the sources, when you said that you'd heard rumors about sexual abuse, you're talking about Dominic Dunn's Vanity Fair article, which was published in 1990,
Yes,
in which there's an indication that Lyle had been abused by his father.
Yes.
Is that correct? And an incident that Bob Rand had shared with you about them bathing as children with their father, which he indicated there was nothing inappropriate about. Is that correct?
correct.
And had you heard any other rumors about sexual abuse?
Not that I recall.
Okay. And you said that you and Donovan then discussed these rumors. Is that correct?
Yes,
And on how many occasions did you and Donovan discuss these rumors?
I have no idea. I can definitely recall on one occasion, but I can't remember if it was discussed more than once or not.
And what is the occasion you definitely recall?
Donovan and I worked together in a restaurant in New York called Boxers, and one night we were up late and we were up late one night discussing the case, and that's where I believe we discussed it.
And who offered what information?
Well, I told Donovan that Bob Rand had told me about this incident with. See, I had gotten the impression from Bob Rand that Eric had told him this story. And so I just discussed that Eric had said something in an interview about that bathing incident, and maybe that's where Dominic Dunn had gotten his information from.
And this is a conversation you and Donovan had.
Yes, correct.
And was there any other discussion in that?
No, I think that was the extent of it.
Were you talking about, gee, this seems like it could be true, or it doesn't make sense, or relating other incidents?
I said, gee, I had never heard anything about sexual abuse, and now this Dominic Dunn article is out, and perhaps you got that from this little incident that Bob Rand had told me about.
And do you remember having your photograph taken for the Los Angeles Times magazine with Donovan?
Yes, in
Okay.
Chuck's Spring Street Cafe. That's correct.
And do you remember having a discussion with him at that time about sexual abuse and whether it had in fact taken place or what you knew?
I don't recall if we discussed it again on that occasion.
But you did discuss it on other occasions.
Yes,
And would you say you talked about it 2, 3, 4 times? How many times would you?
like I said, I only specifically recall discussing it once, and it's possible that it was discussed on other occasions, but I don't have any specific recollection.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Anything else?
No.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Penn. Anything further at this time?
No, not at this time, Your
You
Honor.
want to clean out the back row there and bring anybody else as witnesses? or-
No, I think, no.
All right, are you ready to proceed with testimony of Mr. Wincowski?
Yes, Your Honor, there's one issue, and that was on the tape recording. Remember Mr. Burt brought that up yesterday.
Yeah, the tape recording in regards to what?
The telephone conversation that.
Yeah, there was some issues that both sides wanted to research on that, and
Yes, I'm waiting for a fax from the AG's office in New Jersey as to the wiretap laws there. I spoke with a man who says he was a deputy AG, and he said he faxed me. I don't know if it's here yet, but I could tell my court what my understanding is what the law is. Mr. Wincowski also used to be a peace officer in the state of New Jersey, and was familiar with the laws. So I don't know if the court wants to wait on that until we.
well, why don't you check to see if it's arrived?
Okay,
All right, let's take a short break and let you do that, and then you can let the clerk know if you've gotten any more information.
All right, and in addition, I believe the court talked about the issue of the Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights.
Yes.
And I don't, the only Fifth Amendment rights are.
Well, let's carry it on after you get the information about the.
Oh, okay, but I think that goes to Mr. Stevens, actually. not
Okay.
Mr. Wincowski.
All right.
Okay, so I'll go see what I can find out.
Okay.
Okay, we'll see the court
It'll
later.
be a 10-minute break. Bennett Lyle Menendez and his lawyers are present, as well as the prosecution. And before the next witness testifies, Mr. Wincowski, counsel had some issues you wanted to further discuss. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor. I provided the court with a rather lengthy copy and also counsel of statutes from the state of New Jersey. I was sent this by a prosecutor there, gave me the shortcut version of how to work this package. Does the court have a copy?
I do, and in looking at it, it seems to indicate if one party to a conversation consents to a tape recording of a wire transmission or telephone transmission, then that's an exception to the law of that state. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor, I think that's 2A:156A-4, which is the statute number subsection D. And it's my understanding that if a law enforcement officer does it, that they need some sort of court order, which is outlined in section 8, but that the definition of a law enforcement officer is contained in section 2F. And I believe that Mr. Wincowski would not qualify as a law enforcement officer. The only other exception under section 4 would be subsection C, which would be a person acting at the direction of law enforcement, and we might have to ask Mr. Wincowski about that. But aside from that, that seems to be the only thing that would prevent him from tape recording the conversation. In other words, it's my understanding that prior to tape recording the conversation, he called Detective Zoller and told Detective Zoller that he was going to be calling Lyle back and that he was going to tape record it.
And regardless of that, was he a participant in the conversation?
Yes, his voice can be heard clearly on the tape, and the court will recognize it after you've heard Mr. Wincowski speak 2 words.
And under the statute, does he then fall within the exception because he was a participant,
Yes.
regardless of whether he was acting as a police agent?
Well, I'm not sure. I think under subsection C, I can't tell, but I'm sure Mr. Burt has an argument under subsection C. But that was the only proviso I wanted to make to the court. Aside from that, it looks like he's competent to take record the conversation.
Well, before we hear from Mr. Burt, the issue before the court is one that has just arisen by reason of colloquy yesterday afternoon around 4:45. There had never been a motion filed by the defense to exclude this evidence, which normally is subject to a motion pursuant to section 1538.5 of the Penal Code. We have heard other motions pursuant to that section in this trial, and none address this issue. So the first thing is whether or not the defense is making any such motion, and secondly, why it wasn't done earlier.
All right, I'll address that issue, Your Honor. As the court will recall, the prosecution very early on served us with a motion in limine outlining the statements from numerous witnesses that it intended to offer at this trial. And in response to that motion in limine, the defense then came forward with various objections to the admissibility of evidence. Not included in that motion in limine by the prosecution was any reference to this conversation that we're now discussing. And based on that motion, the defense believed at the time the motion was filed, and based on statements made by the prosecution, that there was no issue as to the admissibility of this particular conversation. So the motion to suppress was not filed because the defense, and I think reasonably, believed that this was not going to be an issue. Had I known that the prosecution was going to offer this, a motion to suppress would have been filed. I think reading these sections, there is a good argument that can be made that subsection C, which was referred to by the prosecution, would apply to exclude this tape under New Jersey law. And I think there's also an argument that there was a violation of the California Wiretap statutes. And I would ask leave of court to make a motion to suppress and to file the appropriate papers. But I also want to point out to the court that we are objecting to the relevancy of this conversation. It does not appear to contain any information which is helpful to the prosecution, other than Lyle Menendez indicating he does not want to discuss any issues with the police. And I've cited to the court a case, People versus Houston, which indicates that the probative value of a refusal is negligible when it's taken on the advice of counsel. And I think that's the situation here. This conversation took place in March of 1990. By then, Mr. Chaliff was involved. The information in the 402 2 hearing was that he indicated to the detectives that he advised the clients not to make statements to the police. And so the most that this could be shown is that Lyle Menendez was acting on the advice of his attorney not to discuss the matter with the police at that stage of the investigation. So it has no probative value. And if the court feels otherwise, I would ask the court for permission to file written points and authorities in support of a motion to suppress.
Well, without reading the law in New Jersey, the complete law, I just read the first few sections here. Is there some exclusionary rule that applies in New Jersey to such transmissions, or is it just a crime to do those things that are prohibited?
I read, forget which section it is, but there is an exclusionary rule section, which is page 136 of the packet that was given to the court by the prosecution.
All right, then let's get back to whether this is relevant information. Refresh my recollection as to exactly what it is, or if you have the tape, you could play that.
No.
Either way.
I have a transcript that's 3 pages, and I think
All right.
that would be the easiest. The
Okay.
inflection is not there, obviously, but I think the court can gather. No, this is the wrong one. Just a second. May I approach, please?
Yes. All right, there is a provision in New Jersey law similar to that in California that excludes the use of any such transmissions. And the specific page and line that you're referring to is where?
It's at the bottom of page 1, the very last line, starting with R, I don't know, I got their number, up until the next exchange. But there's another reason I want to introduce the conversation.
All right, yes.
This phone call was placed by Mr. Wincowski to an airplane that Mr. Menendez was traveling in with Mr. Stevens and another classmate. Upon terminating this phone call with Mr. Wincowski, Mr. Menendez, Lyle Menendez, handed money to Mr. Stevens and Mr. Rogers, the other friend, and indicated if anything should happen to him, they should use that money to help him, and that he gave them then the name of his attorney to call. So what the probative value, more importantly, is that as soon as he found out the police were circling around him, he immediately made plans to get some sort of help from his friends. And I think that this explains his conduct on the airplane when he gave the money in the car to his friends.
The defense objection number 1 is to the playing of the tape. And number 2, the defense objection is to that line that you have identified on page 1 and following on page 2, which is a little different than what I had thought it was. The Wincowski is quoted as saying, I don't know, I got their number, they wanted, give them a call. And the defendant said, oh, no, that's all right.
I think the actual tape, she's left some blanks there. My listening to the tape indicates he said, something along the lines of, why don't you give them a call? Directing that comment to Lyle Menendez, and then the comment, oh, no, that's all right. Is that correct?
Yeah, do you want to just hear the tape? You can.
No, not at this point. I don't, but I might in a few minutes. I just wanted to carry on the conversation here. The defense objection is to the specific language that Mr. Burt has referred to here. Are you objecting to Mr. Wincowski testifying about the conversation, or are you disputing that the conversation took place, or what was said in the conversation?
Not disputing that the conversation took place, we're objecting to the take on wiretap grounds, and we're objecting to that specific portion of the conversation based on right to counsel and privilege against self-incrimination grounds.
The offer by the prosecution as far as Lyle Menendez's reaction after the phone call, you're not objecting to?
I am objecting to that, as I don't see how the substance of this conversation relates to that explanation.
That Mr. Menendez, immediately after calling or speaking with Mr. Wincowski, then alerts his friends or companions to the fact that he's going to be arrested shortly and they should call his lawyer.
I don't see how the substance of this conversation is relevant to that theory. She's been able to proceed up to this point without any reference to the connection between this conversation and the matter she seeks to elicit. And in fact, this is the first time I've ever heard of such a theory. There's no indication in the discovery that these two things are connected. But up to this point in the case, she's been perfectly capable of explaining through the testimony of Glen Stevens that Lyle Menendez at some point during this plane ride turned to him and made the statement that he made. So I don't see the probative value of a further hearsay conversation to explain something that Glen Stevens has already been going to explain.
Well, it relates to Lyle Menendez referring to or speaking on the phone with someone who refers to Beverly Hills police looking to speak with him. And obviously they weren't looking to discuss a traffic citation with him. So the inference is that he was aware of why they were there and why they were looking for him. And then he reacted to it. All right, so what is the people's specific position in regards to the relevance of the defendant's oral response to Wincowski in light of the fact that the defendant had counsel at that point?
Well, he had counsel at that point, but it's in the form of an accusation or a prompting by a private citizen. And under the case law, somebody's invocation of their right to silence, for instance, when prompted by a private citizen, is not a violation of the Fifth Amendment right. And the case I would cite to the court is People versus Martin, 101 Calif, 3rd, page 1000, pages 1006 through 1007. I have the book here if the court wants to look at it. But as far as that argument, I don't think it is valid in this case.
But then you indicate that perhaps Mr. Wincowski was a police agent rather than
No.
a civilian.
I wasn't indicating that at all. I was indicating that might be the defense argument, and I didn't want to hide the ball with the court. I wanted the court to be aware of the fact that Mr. Wincowski evidently called the Beverly Hills police prior to tape recording the conversation and informed them that he was going to do that. So I wanted the court to be aware of those facts. But I'm not suggesting that makes him an agent. That just makes him someone who was advising him of what he as a private citizen was intending to do.
All right, how long is Wincowski's testimony other than this particular conversation?
Probably a half an hour.
All right, well, let's take some testimony from him because we have the jury sitting here, and then hold off on this issue until I have a chance to hear the tape recording and read these cases that you're citing.
Okay, I'll present this to the court.
Well, I'll look at it at a recess. I don't
Okay.
want to read it while I'm listening to the testimony here.
All right, shall I get the witness then?
Yes, any other objections before Wincowski testifies then?
I think we worked out everything yesterday. Your Honor, two things. Could the court ask the jurors if they watched television last night? And secondly, one of the jurors, one of the alternates, tried to speak to me today, and I said, I cannot talk to you, Mr. Rondoni. So could the court again admonish the jurors?
Certainly,
We're not being unfriendly.
certainly.
Okay, thank you.
All right, then we'll get the jurors out and the witness in.
Shall I call the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, please. The jury is in the courtroom. Call the witness.
People call Mr. Richard Wenskoski to the stand.
Please raise your right hand. If you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give in cause of opinion before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please take the stand and state your name for the record.
My name is Richard Wenskoski,
And spell your last name.
Wenskoski.
All right, and we're now proceeding in the case of People versus Lyle Menendez. The jury is in the jury box. Belated good morning to you all. sorry for the delay, but some matters have arisen that caused us to be a little late this morning with you, and I apologize for that. Before we get started with testimony, just a couple of things I'd like to discuss with you. First of all, have any of you seen any television stories about this case, or read any newspaper articles, or heard any radio broadcasts, or heard any discussions or conversations about this case in the last, since the trial started? Anybody? If you do, would you raise your hand? Okay. All right. Also, just to reinforce what I've said before, do not have any contact with any of the parties involved in the case. We have a lot of witnesses in the hallway and interested people involved in the case who are in the hallway at recesses, and also the lawyers are going to be in the hallway or in the elevators or downstairs, whatever. Don't have any contact with them. Don't even initiate a conversation or start a conversation with them, because even the most innocent type of conversation can be misconstrued. If you were to be seen talking to the lawyers for one side or a witness for one side, everyone would get the impression that maybe you're showing favoritism towards one side over the other. So just avoid any contact with anybody involved in the case. All right. You may question the witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Wenskowski, what do you do for a living right now?
I'm Director of Security for a food service company.
And in August and September of 1989, did you also work in security?
Yes,
Did you work for a different company from the one you work for now?
yes, I did.
What was the name of the company that you worked for in August and September of 1989?
DB Kelly Associates.
And what kind of company was that? What kind of services were provided by DB Kelly?
It was a private investigational company along with a guard service company.
Is that a guard service? Is that what you said?
Yes,
Bodyguards?
yes,
Prior to working at DB Kelly, did you have any law enforcement experience?
yes, I have.
Could you explain to us what it was?
I was an Edison police officer for 15 years and a police officer in Middlesex County, New Jersey for 3 years,
What is Edison?
Township of New Jersey.
So you had 18 years of law enforcement experience before you went into the security business?
Yes, ma'am.
And was DB Kelly your first security job?
No, I worked for Salem and Associates before DB Kelly.
Back in August of 1989, were you employed to provide bodyguard services for someone?
Yes, I did.
Was that a young man?
Yes,
You see him in court here today?
yes, ma'am.
Did you indicate to the jury and the judge where he's seated today?
You see at the table to my left, wearing a white striped shirt, no tie.
Identifying the defendant, Lyle Menendez.
Thank you. Mr. Wenskowski, do you remember precisely the day it was that you started to provide bodyguard services for Mr. Menendez?
I believe it was approximately August the 28th or 29th.
Were you aware that at some point that the parents of Mr. Menendez had been killed in California?
Yes,
Were you aware that there had been a memorial service in New Jersey on their behalf?
yes,
Did you begin your bodyguard services for Mr. Lyle Menendez before, during, or after the memorial service?
it was after the memorial service.
And could you explain to me what kind of services you provided for Mr. Menendez?
We,
No, wait. You say we. Who's we?
I also had a partner,
And what was your partner's name?
John Aquaro.
Is that Aquaro?
Yes,
Okay, what did you and Mr. Aquaro do?
we bodyguarded Lyle for approximately a week or so. We spent 24 hours a day with him.
At the time that you were providing bodyguard services for him, were you armed with a weapon?
Yes, ma'am.
What kind of weapon did you have?
A Browning 9mm.
And that was carried with you at all times, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, I'm a little concerned or confused. If it was 24 hours a day, did you sleep?
Yes, we did. We had adjoining rooms with Lyle
Okay, now, where did you have these adjoining rooms?
at the Princeton Hyatt.
Okay, so that's a typical Hyatt hotel?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And during the course of this time with Mr. Menendez, where did you go with him?
We went shopping. We went to the U.S. Open. We went looking at homes, cars.
When you say the U.S. Open, is that the U.S. Open tennis tournament?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you, in fact, attend that tennis tournament Labor Day weekend with Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
Do you remember what day of the week it was that you went to the U.S. Open?
No, I don't recall.
And so were you with him continually during this, I think you said 7 or 8 day period? Was there any period of time you weren't with him?
There was approximately a day and a half I was not with him.
Now, during that day and a half, can you remember why it was that you weren't with him?
I went home to my family, and the president of the company, Dennis Kelly, stood in for me.
Was there also another occasion in which Mr. Menendez was taken to the airport in your company?
Yes.
Do you remember when that was?
That was approximately August the 30th, I believe.
All right, could you explain to us what happened?
Lyle told me he had to fly back to Los Angeles and to see his brother, and something about a will on a computer.
Okay, so what is the best of your recollection as to the conversation he had with you before leaving as to the will on the computer?
He said he had to meet with his brother, and they had his brother was finding somebody out in California to do something with a will on a computer.
Okay, was he any more specific with you than that at that time?
No, he wasn't, no.
Okay. So where did you then go?
Then we left, and Lyle flew out to California.
Do you remember from which airport he flew to California?
Newark.
Newark?
Newark.
Okay. Mr. Wenskowski, when was the next time you saw Lyle in terms of hours after you saw him off at Newark Airport?
He flew back the next morning. I met him at the airport.
And then you returned to the Princeton area?
Yes.
Approximately how far is it from Princeton to Newark?
40 miles.
Okay, now this may be a silly question, but are you a New Jersey native?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Mr. Wenskowski, when you were traveling with Lyle during this period of time, minus the day and a half, in what method, what means did you travel?
Lyle was in a limousine, and most of the time I was in a vehicle behind the limousine.
Okay, what was the purpose of you being in a vehicle behind the limousine?
That was sort of like a crash vehicle.
What's a crash vehicle?
Well, if somebody attempted to harm Lyle while we were in traffic or on the roadway, we always had a second vehicle. If something happened to the limousine, we had a second vehicle to take Lyle out of the area.
Okay, so that was a security precaution, is that
Yes,
correct?
ma'am.
Right. While you were with Lyle Menendez, did he ever tell you why it was he wanted a bodyguard?
Yes, he did.
Okay, what did he tell you?
He said that his parents were murdered by either the cartel or the mob.
Okay.
And he was in fear of his life.
Okay, now, when you say the cartel, what was your understanding of what the cartel was?
My understanding was the South American drug cartel or drug mob.
And when he used the word mob, did that mean to you the Cosa Nostra?
That's what I took it to be, yes.
Okay. In regards to that, did you take any special precautions to protect yourself?
Yes.
What did you do?
We had we purchased bulletproof vests. And
Now, did you purchase bulletproof vests just for this job?
yes, ma'am.
So prior to that, in your experience as a bodyguard, you hadn't used one?
No.
Returning to when you went to the airport to pick up Mr. Menendez after he'd been gone, did he make any comments to you about how the trip had gone in California?
Yes, I asked him how everything worked out in California. He says everything was fine, Rich.
Right. I believe you indicated during the period of time that you were guarding him that one of your activities was shopping. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you ever shop for any vehicles?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you describe what you did in that regard, please?
We went to a Porsche dealer located on Route 1 in the Princeton area, at which time Lyle was looking at a white Porsche convertible.
Did you ever see him or did you ever go with him while he test drove a Porsche?
Yes, we
All right.
went for a test drive.
All right. For about how long did you go for the test drive?
15 minutes.
Okay. And who was driving?
Lyle was.
Okay. Did he appear to know how to drive the car?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did he break any speed laws?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you actually see him close the purchase of the Porsche?
No.
Did you do any other shopping involving real estate?
Yes, we went to a housing development in the Princeton area where we looked at patio homes.
Okay. Now, what's a patio home as far as you understand it?
Patio home is a dwelling that is right next to another home, so to speak. They only have little yards in the front and maybe a little side yard in the back. and it was a two-story home.
Okay, so they would be attached to other homes on both sides?
Yes, or at least on one side, and
Okay.
there'd be a wall in between.
Did Mr. Menendez have any discussion with you about whether or not he wanted to buy one of these patio homes?
Yes, he brought me into the home and asked me if I liked it, and we looked around the house.
Now, in regards to the Porsche, did Mr. Menendez ever ask you your opinion about the Porsche?
Yes, he did.
What kind of discussions did you have generally?
Generally, when he looked at things, he asked my opinion. If I liked them, would it be good for him, and do you think he would enjoy it?
Did he ever tell you why it was he was asking your opinion about these things?
Later on, during the time I spent with him, he said that I kind of reminded him of his dad. He said I was kind of about the same age, and he looked at me as a father figure.
Did you ever see Mr. Menendez wearing any kind of wristwatch?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, do you remember what kind it was?
It was a Rolex.
Now, during this period of time, did you ever meet his brother, Eric Menendez?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so your contact was solely with Lyle Menendez, is that correct?
Yes.
The Rolex, could you describe it for me, please?
It was a gold watch, gold band with I believe a gold face. Look, a regular Rolex.
And so you'd seen Rolexes before this occasion, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, I believe you indicated that you carried a weapon during this period of time, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you ever have any discussions with Lyle Menendez about weapons and ballistics and things like that?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you relate to us approximately when it was? And we'll use the trip to the trip out of Newark as the before or after point. The discussion you had with him about weapons, was that before or after the trip to Newark Airport?
After.
Okay, and what was said to you by Mr. Menendez, and what did you respond?
Well, we were getting ready for dinner one night, and he was looking at the weapon, and he asked me if you can get ballistics off of a pistol. And I said yes. And then he asked me if you can get them off of a shotgun, and I said no.
Okay, and so your understanding at the time when you made that response is that you cannot get ballistics off a shotgun,
Yes, ma'am.
but you're not a ballistics expert, correct?
No, ma'am.
This was from your experience as having been a police officer?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, why was it that you felt the necessity of buying a bulletproof vest?
Was due to the type of crimes that were committed against his parents, how many times they were shot, and it was worse than an execution type murder. It was almost like a message trying to be sent.
Now, who gave you this information? Was it Lyle Menendez or someone else?
Lyle gave me some of the information, and my boss at the time, D.B. Kelly, gave me the other information.
And now, did Lyle Menendez ever indicate to you that he was in fear of someone that you should guard him from?
Yes.
Okay, what generally did he tell you about that?
He figured that him and his brother were in severe danger because of if they did that to his parents, they're going to try to do the same thing to him and his brother.
And it was he that gave you the idea that it was someone in the cartel or the mob, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, during the period of time that you were bodyguarding Mr. Lyle Menendez, did you ever see him in the company of a friend of his named Glen Stevens?
Yes.
Okay, and is Mr. Stevens out in the hallway?
Yes, he is.
And you recognize him from having seen him in August and September of 1989?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you ever go shopping for any other kind of vehicles?
No.
Did you ever, were you ever asked by Mr. Menendez to get you prices for any other kind of vehicles?
Yes.
Could you tell us what Mr. Menendez told you in this regard, please?
He wanted a price on a bulletproof limousine.
And did you, in fact, try to obtain prices for a bulletproof limousine?
Yes, I passed that information on to my superior, and he looked into it. He was looking into it, into purchasing a limo.
Did you ever get back to Mr. Lyle Menendez about the purchase of a bulletproof limousine?
Not during the time, no.
Okay.
No.
Now, at some point, I believe your employment was terminated. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did Mr. Lyle Menendez ever tell you why it was that your services were no longer required?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And do you remember the date that this occurred? Well, let me ask you this. Let me back up. You indicated you went to the U.S. Open. Was that over Labor Day weekend?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Was it sometime after Labor Day weekend that your employment was terminated?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you remember what day of the week it was?
Day of the week, I believe it was a Wednesday.
All right.
I believe it was a Wednesday.
So that would have been the Wednesday after Labor Day of 1989.
Yes.
And what did Mr. Lyle Menendez tell you about why your services were no longer required?
He said that his uncle had contacted somebody in New York City, and a mob figure, I believe that was the exact term he used. His uncle went to see somebody in the mob in New York City, and they assured his uncle that Lyle was no longer in danger, or his brother.
And that was the end of your contact in 1989 with Mr. Lyle Menendez?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, I believe you indicated you did other shopping. What kind of shopping did you do with him aside from homes and vehicles?
We went clothes shopping. He bought suits and shoes, shirts, ties. We went shopping for tennis equipment, tennis rackets, sports sneakers, and outerwear.
And when you first met Lyle Menendez, was that at the Princeton Hyatt or was that at another hotel?
That was at another hotel,
And what's the name of the other hotel?
the Nassau Inn.
Okay, and is that a hotel inside the Princeton area?
Yes, ma'am.
When you first met him at the the Nassau Inn, did you actually go into his room?
Yes,
And did you accompany him when he checked out of the hotel and left?
yes.
Did he leave anything behind in his room when you left?
Yes, he did. He left a couple pairs of boots, some shoes, a jacket, shirts. There was a drawer open. There was undergarments left in there.
Did you make any comment to Mr. Menendez about leaving these things behind?
Yes, I asked him, I says, shouldn't we pick this stuff up? You want me to pick it up, gather it? He says, no. He says, leave everything. He says, I don't want anything to remind me. He says, I want to buy new stuff.
Okay. And so it was after that you went on these shopping expeditions, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
When you went shopping for clothes and tennis equipment and things like that, how did he purchase these items?
With credit cards.
Okay, were you able to ascertain whose credit cards they were?
No.
All right. Did you ever see any of those credit cards refused?
Yes.
In conjunction with that, did you ever take Mr. Lyle Menendez anywhere to get more money?
Yes.
And did Mr. Lyle Menendez tell you where he wanted to go and why?
Yes.
Okay, what happened there?
Lyle said that he needed more money and he was going to visit his Uncle Carlos. We went there twice, I believe, and both times Lyle said it was to obtain money.
Okay, and did you actually accompany him inside of the house to get the money, or did you wait?
I waited outside.
And when he came back, did he ever indicate on either of the two occasions that he had been successful in getting money?
Yes, he did.
Now, did Lyle Menendez ever tell you directly what had happened to his parents?
He said that they were killed by shotguns while they were watching TV in their home in Beverly Hills.
All right, and when was it in your relationship with him that he told you this? Was it the first day, the second?
I believe it was the very first day.
All right.
Because I wanted to know exactly what what I was looking at.
Were you concerned about your personal safety?
A little bit, yes.
When you went to look at the Porsche and you went to the patio homes, could you describe his demeanor for me?
He was normal. Him and Glenn were laughing and talking and joking. There was no, he didn't look upset.
Did you ever see him cry?
No, ma'am.
Now, as a police officer and your 18 years, had you ever seen people who had been the victims of crimes or witnesses who were aggrieved?
Yes, ma'am.
Did he appear to be aggrieved to you?
No, ma'am.
When he was purchasing these items, did he appear unhappy?
No, not at all.
Okay. Subject to the court's order, I have no further questions at this time.
All right, cross-examination.
Good morning, Mr. Wenskoski.
Good morning, sir.
I want to pinpoint, if we could, the time period that we're talking about. I think you said you first met Lyle Menendez on August 28th or 29th?
Yes,
Is
sir.
that right?
Yes, sir.
And where did you first meet him, if you recall?
At the Nassau Inn. Yes, at the Nassau Inn.
Were you dispatched there by your boss who sent you out there, and then you met Lyle in person?
Yes.
And when was the last time you saw him in person?
in person, I believe it was September the 4th or 5th. And that was at the Princeton Hyatt Hotel.
Okay, so, and that was the last time you ever saw him in person up until today,
Yes, sir.
correct?
Yes.
So you're with him in total for a period of about 7 or 8 days.
Yes, sir.
And I think you said also that during that 7 or 8 day period, you were away from the scene, away from him for at least a day, maybe a couple of days.
A day and a half, I believe.
And during that day and a half, your boss, Dennis Kelly, took over for you.
Yes, sir.
You never met Eric Menendez.
No, sir.
Was it during that day and a half period when you were off that your boss and your partner, John, met up with Eric Menendez and took him somewhere? If you know.
I believe my boss contacted another private investigator in New York City, and they met and they went to the U.S. Open, I think.
At some point during that 7 or 8 day period, did Lyle indicate to you that he was worried about his little brother?
Yes, he did.
And what was the context of that conversation?
Lyle said that he was concerned about his little brother that out here in California at the time, and his brother wasn't taking this seriously, what had happened to his parents.
Did it appear to you, just based on his demeanor, that he was seriously concerned about his brother?
Yes, sir.
Now, I think you testified that although you only knew Lyle Menendez for this 7 or 8 day period, that he, in fact, was consulting you about decisions in his life, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And that was something that stuck out in your mind, isn't that true?
Yes.
In other words, you were with him on various trips that you've described, and in each instance, he would ask for your advice as to whether you thought it was good for him to make a particular purchase.
Yes,
Is that
sir, at
correct?
times, yes.
And those were the words he used. He said to you, do you think this would be good for me?
I wanted, at several times he said that to me, yes.
And that extended even to such minor items as clothing that he was purchasing, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You'd be in a store with him, and instead of making the decision for himself, he would turn to you and ask whether you thought it was good for him that he was making a particular purchase.
Well, he he lined up some shoes and suits and ties and shirts, and he asked me if this would look good on him. Do I like the way this looks? And things of that nature.
And this is from a person that you knew less than 2 weeks, right?
Yes, sir.
That seemed unusual to you, did it not?
Yes, sir.
And I think you also mentioned that at some point in time, he in fact mentioned to you that you were some sort of a father figure.
He said that I reminded him a lot of his dad. I was about the same age, and I think my hair was a little darker at the time. And yes, he did.
Can you give me a little bit more of what that conversation was in terms of where it took place and what you were talking about before that statement came up about you being a father figure to him?
That was, I believe, a day or two right before we stopped Bodyguard and Lyle. We were at the Princeton Hyatt. We were having lunch downstairs. And that's when he said, he thanked me. He says, Rich, I want to thank you. He says, you stood by me and you helped me out a lot. He says, and thank you, he says.
Was he sincere when he told you that?
Yes,
Thank
he was.
you. Did he seem emotional as he related that to you?
No.
I don't mean he wasn't crying, breaking down, but did he seem like it was something that he meant as he told you that?
Yes, he did. Yes, it was something he meant.
And did you in general have a good relationship with him during that 1 week period of time?
Yes, we did.
Now, is it true that Lyle, never mentioned to you the death of his parents? That was a subject that was never talked about.
No, it wasn't. We never discussed it.
Never said anything about that at all, did he?
No.
And you mentioned a conversation that you had with him about a computer. Is that right?
Yes.
Did he know you were a police officer or a former police officer?
Yeah, I think I did tell him. Yeah.
And yet he openly talked to you about the fact that he was going to California to take care of some problem relating to a computer?
Yes, the will, I believe he said.
And when he got back, he told you that everything was fine, words to that effect,
Yeah,
correct?
he said everything worked out, everything was fine.
Did he ever say to you, hey, don't mention to anybody that we had this discussion about a
No.
will or a computer?
No,
Made
sir.
no attempt to influence you in any way not to reveal that to whoever you choose to reveal it to, correct?
No, sir.
And other than the brief mention that you've already told us about, did he say anything else about a will or a computer?
No, sir, he did not.
You mentioned that these purchases he made were made with credit cards, is that right?
Yes.
Did he have a lot of cash that he was throwing around?
He didn't have a lot of cash. No, he didn't.
And the credit card purchases, you said at one point the credit cards were refused, is that right?
Yes, we were at a clothing store, and I think he went to 2 or 3 credit cards before one was taken.
And you also indicated that when he didn't have the money, he would go to his Uncle Carlos to get more for whatever it was he was buying,
Well,
correct?
not that I had knowledge that he didn't have any more money. He would tell me, Rich, we're going to my Uncle Carlos' house tonight. It was usually at night. That's when we went there, twice at night. And he says he was going to try to go get some more money.
Now, as one of the things he said, you said although he didn't mention anything about the death of his parents, he told you this story about the mob, correct?
Yes, he did.
And he also said something about being in fear
Yes.
for his life. What did he say about that?
He told me that the way his parents were killed, that they were going to come after him and his brother.
And did he in fact seem fearful to you?
He was concerned, yes. He seemed concerned. Enough
And-
that at the time that I took it very, very seriously.
And he seemed paranoid during a certain period that you were with him?
Can you
No.
call for a psychological conclusion on the part of the witness?
Objection sustained, the answer is straight.
Did he seem to you to be genuinely fearful as during the period of time that you were with him?
No, sir. On the contrary, he would jump out of the limousine before we even would stop and go running into stores. And several times he'd walk away, and we would say, "Lyle, wait a minute. Let us go out of the store first." And yeah, he wasn't fearful. No.
And do you remember describing to the detectives from Beverly Hills when they asked you about this that, in your opinion, he seemed to be paranoid when you first met him?
When I first met him, yes.
What did you mean by that, he was paranoid? I realize you're not a psychiatrist, but what did that mean to you when you said that?
Well, in the first day or two, he would come out of the building or dwelling that we were at and look around and just seem nervous the first day or two.
Now, was it also true that aside from Lyle, you were receiving information from other people that people were following you, for instance?
Objection calls for hearsay, Your Honor.
This goes to a state of mind. It's non-hearsay,
Irrelevant.
Whose state of mind?
the witnesses.
Objection sustained.
Did you ever have a conversation with the limo driver about the security precautions that you were taking in relation to Lyle Menendez?
Yes,
And you indicated that there were certain reasons you had for carrying a gun and getting a bulletproof vest, correct?
yes.
In relation to those reasons, did the limo driver at some point indicate to you that he thought someone was following you?
Yes, he did. He mentioned something about the FBI, or he was informed by his office that he thought that the FBI was following Lyle or the limousine.
Your Honor, I'd ask that that be limited only to his state of mind and not the truth of the matter, sir.
No objection to
All
that?
right, that last answer is not received for the truth of what was contained in it. There wasn't any truth to the fact the FBI was doing any following, just was received to show that this witness received that information and what, if anything, it had to do with his state of mind, the witness's state of mind.
At some point in time, did you take Lyle Menendez and Glen Stevens to New York City?
Yes, sir.
And did Lyle and Glenn ask you to take them to a restaurant?
No, I didn't take him to no restaurant. We took him to the U.S. Open.
And that was the only trip you made with
Yes, sir.
Glen Stevens and Lyle Menendez to New York City, is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, this conversation you said that took place about the gun, that was in the hotel room at the Hyatt.
Yes, we were dressing for dinner one night.
And you said that was after he came back from
California.
California. And you were in your bedroom and Lyle came in, is that correct?
Yes,
And at that time, you had that brief conversation about whether you could get rifling off your gun, which was a pistol, correct?
yes, sir.
And he asked you about the shotgun. And was Glen Stevens present during that conversation?
I don't recall. I don't know whether Glenn was in the room or not.
Right.
I really don't.
That's a conversation which you did not mention to the detectives when they first talked to you about the case. Isn't that true?
I don't know whether it was the first meeting or the second meeting I had with the Beverly Hills Police Department, but it was mentioned to him.
Right. You first met them around September of 1989.
I don't know if it was that early. I don't know if it was in September, sir.
September 19th, 1989. Do you remember being interviewed by Detective Zoller?
Yes, yes.
And do you think you mentioned that conversation at that time?
I don't recall.
Did you also have a second conversation with Detective Zoller on February 27th, 1990?
Yes,
And that was a situation where Detective Zoller came to your place of business and took you to Lyle Menendez's restaurant?
yes, sir.
And how long were you with Detective Zoller on that occasion?
Couple hours.
During any of that period of time, do you think you mentioned this incident about the discussion about the gun?
I don't remember when I told him, sir.
And do you remember that you were flown out here by the prosecution to testify at the grand jury proceeding?
Yes, sir.
That was in 1992.
Yes, sir.
And isn't it true that that's the first time that you mentioned that conversation?
No.
You had mentioned it in your interviews before with Detective Zoller.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Has the prosecution treated you pretty well in this case?
Yes, sir.
Have they paid all your expenses?
Your Honor, objection or relevant?
Some bias, interest, or motive?
Be a little more specific when you talk about expenses, what you mean?
Sure. Has the prosecution paid for your travel expenses to come out here?
Yes, sir.
Have they put you up in a nice hotel?
Yes, sir.
Did they put you up in a nice hotel when you were out here for your grand jury testimony?
Yes, sir.
Did Detective Zoller also show you around the town a little bit?
Yes, he showed us his police department.
Did you do anything with him after hours?
I believe we had a drink or two, yes.
And you and Glen Stevens and Detective Zoller had a drink or two?
I don't know if Glenn was with us or not.
Did
Yeah, he must have been. He must have been.
And did Detective Zoller take you and Glen Stevens to a topless bar here in Los Angeles?
Oh, I don't remember that, sir. I would remember that.
You would have remembered that. Right. And you don't remember that, but you remember going out with him and Glen Stevens for some drinks.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Wenskoski, I believe you indicated on cross-examination that Lyle Menendez consulted you about various purchases he wanted to make. Did you ever talk to him about the money he was spending?
No, ma'am. He never indicated to me he indicated to me he had money, and that's why he wanted to buy new items.
Now, I believe that you were also asked on cross-examination that Lyle Menendez mentioned that he was going to Los Angeles to do something with a will and a computer. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Did he ever indicate to you that he was going to erase the will in case it disinherited him?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. Nothing.
Anything else?
Did he also indicate to you that the reason he was buying these clothing items was because he didn't have any clothes since he was leaving his clothes in the Nassau Inn?
Yes, he did. He said he left a lot of items back in California, and he left a lot of items in the Nassau Inn, and he wanted to buy all new stuff.
And you said, I believe, that when you drew that to his attention that he was leaving items in the room, he made a statement to you along the lines of, I don't want anything to remind me. Do you remember that
Yes, sir.
testimony? Did he say what he was referring to there?
No, I gathered he didn't want anything to remind him of maybe some of the clothes his parents bought him, or to that effect. I was led to believe that he wanted to not recall or not have any understanding or feelings of what had occurred with his parents.
Your Honor, I move to start the speculation on part of the witness.
Well, the objection could have been made earlier, but the objection is sustained and the answer is stricken.
The entire
The
answer?
entire answer is stricken. You can ask the question again, but I believe the answer included entire speculation and conclusion on the part of the witness.
Could I have the reporter reread the
Yeah.
question? And then could you re-answer the question, please, without the speculation?
Just say yes or no. I believe the question called for that.
Question, did he say what he was referring to there?
Let's put it in context.
Question, and you said, I believe, that when you drew that to his attention that he was leaving items in the room, he made a statement to you along the lines of, I don't want anything to remind me. Do you remember that testimony? Answer yes. Question, did he say what he was referring to there?
No,
And was he in a serious mood when he made that statement to you?
no,
Did you ask any follow-up questions when he made that statement?
no.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Anything else?
Not at this time, Your Honor.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll excuse you until 1:45. There are some matters that we have to yet finish discussing here. Don't discuss this case with anyone. Don't look at any of the news coverage, obviously, and don't form any opinions about it. And you're excused until 1:45. And you can report back to the courtroom at that time. And we'll ask that the witness remain here. All right, go ahead.
At the time that you made this telephone call, did you have police officer status in New Jersey?
No, ma'am.
Right. And was it your decision then to tape record the phone call?
Yes, ma'am.
Was it your understanding in New Jersey that a private citizen can tape record their own phone calls?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. And it was not suggested to you by Detective Zoller that you should do that?
Not at all, no.
Right. Why did you tape record it?
Because of the circumstances surrounding the new developments in the case. I was informed by Detective Zola that Lyle and his brother were becoming strong suspects in the murders.
And was that on February the 27th of 1990 that you were informed by Detective Zoller of that?
Yes, ma'am.
And was that when you and Detective Zoller visited a restaurant in Princeton purportedly belonging to Lyle Menendez?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions of this witness at this time.
Mr. Wenskoski, you mentioned that you received information from somebody else that Lyle had called you, correct?
Yes,
And that was Mr. Kelly, your boss?
yes.
And in fact, he had tape recorded the conversation with Lyle Menendez in which Lyle had called for you. Isn't that true?
I don't know. I don't know that, sir.
Well, didn't you listen to the tape recording in which your voice is on a tape which has been edited and the complete tape shows Lyle Menendez calling Dennis Kelly about 5 minutes before you came in and called him back?
I don't recall listening to that tape.
Your Honor, counsel, is there a stipulation that the complete tape that you've edited includes a tape recorded conversation from Dennis Kelly?
Yes, the tape that I have in my hand has both segments you're referring to, but I also did not play this for the witness.
Right. And if the tape recording was made by Dennis Kelly, as was indicated there, you don't know the circumstances under which he made the recording, correct?
No, sir, I don't.
The tape recording equipment was already set up when you came in and returned the call. Isn't that true?
I don't believe so. I called him from my own phone in my office.
And did you use the same tape that, a tape that Dennis Kelly gave to you to record the conversation?
Yes, sir.
And did you know that there was already something on that tape that was being used?
I don't recall. I don't remember.
Are you saying that after you were out to lunch, correct?
Yes, sir.
And when you came back, are you saying that Dennis Kelly never mentioned to you that Lyle Menendez had called and he had tape recorded the call?
He told me that Lyle had called and that I should call Lyle back.
And he never mentioned that he had tape recorded the call?
He might have, because maybe that's why I tape recorded mine also.
And do you know under what circumstances he had tape recorded the first call?
No, sir.
Now, did you, before you called Lyle Menendez, get on the phone to Detective Zoller?
I must have, yes.
And how long of a conversation did you have with him?
Not long, a minute or two, just to inform that Lyle had called me.
Why were you calling at that point to inform him of the fact that Lyle had called you?
Well, I know that there was a police investigation going on concerning Lyle, and I wanted to, basically, being a police officer, I didn't want to hurt or jeopardize the case that was taking place.
And did Detective Zoller indicate to you that an arrest was going to occur very shortly?
No, he did not.
What did he indicate to you?
He indicated for me to call Lyle and see what Lyle wanted.
And is it your testimony that there was absolutely no discussion between the investigating officer on the case and you as to how you were going to memorialize this conversation?
That's correct. The officer never told me to tape record the conversation.
And in fact, you had no discussion whatsoever about that topic, correct?
No, I don't believe so.
And so the entire conversation was you called Detective Zoller and said, Lyle just called me. And he said, why don't you call him back, correct?
Yes.
And did he tell you that he was a suspect at that point?
No. No.
And the only thing he said was call him back.
Call him back.
And you then tape recorded the telephone conversation?
Yes, sir.
And what'd you do with the tape recording at that point?
I turned it over to my superior, Dennis Kelly.
And what did he do with it, if you know?
I don't know what he did with it, sir. I believe he sent it out to Detective Zoller.
Right away?
I don't know, sir. I don't know what the time frame might be.
Do you know how he knew to send it out to Detective Zoller?
No, sir.
Is that what you were going to do with the recording? Was that the purpose in making it?
Yes.
In other words, to memorialize the conversation as possible use as evidence against Lyle Menendez?
Well, I wouldn't say use against him. Use how the detective seen fit, for or against.
Did you think that you were aiding the Beverly Hills Police Department in their investigation at that point by making that tape recording?
Aiding? No, I felt that I was assisting them in some manner.
Did Detective Zoller in your prior conversations with him prior to this telephone conversation indicate to you that if you had any contact with Lyle Menendez, you should be on the lookout for anything that he might say that might be suspicious?
No, sir.
There was no discussion at all about that?
No.
You spent about 2 hours with him on the 27th of February
With who, sir?
with Detective Zoller?
Yes, sir.
And during that entire time you were with him, there was no discussion between the two of you as to what you should do if Lyle Menendez called you?
No, there was no discussion.
None whatsoever?
No, not that I recall, no.
And Detective Zoller never asked you to, in any way, memorialize your conversations with Lyle Menendez, correct?
That's correct.
Something you did all on your own?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Yes, did Detective Zoller tell you what kind of questions to talk to Lyle Menendez about?
No, ma'am.
And in the office where you worked, did you have tape recording equipment readily available for the purpose of tape recording phone calls?
Yes, ma'am.
Had you done it before in your employment at DB Kelly?
Yes, ma'am.
Was it an unusual occurrence for you to tape record a phone call?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. Nothing further.
What was your understanding as far as New Jersey law as whether or not it was lawful to do that, tape record a phone call?
It was my understanding it was lawful. Yes.
Anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay, do you have that tape?
Yes, Your Honor.
Would you like to play it so I can hear it?
Yes. Is there any objection to the witness listening to it as well? I have it queued for proper place. Does the court have the transcript?
Yes.
I think it helps. I will stipulate that the court reporter needs not transcribe this, Your Honor.
So stipulated?
Yes, sure.
just walked in, then it says you called. Yeah. I'm not sure if it was yourself, but apparently John and I think his son came into the restaurant. Friday? Yeah. Yeah. There's two Beverly Hills cops that were up here and wanted us to go with them. I don't know. I got your number. They wanted to give a call. No, that's all right. You don't have any idea where I am. You don't think there was something on the way there? No, they just said, you come with us, we're going to take a ride to Princeton. We jumped in the car, and next thing I know, I was at Mr. Buffalo's. Is that the name of it? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And, they asked my manager there if he was like that or was protected or something like that. He was nothing to do anything about that. Jeez, not in front of me. I didn't hear him say anything like that. Okay. So they weren't aware of any problem that might require your guys' help? No. Okay. Hey, that's strange, huh? Wonder why they wanted you guys to come down there. Any idea? I have no idea. They called and they wanted to speak with the gentleman at Bodyguard again. I took the call, and the next thing I know, they were knocking on our office door, and I said, come on, take a ride with us. And they did say, oh, well, I'll call you, because we were asking them questions, you know, and they wouldn't answer anything. The only thing they said, how Lyle call us if you see him, or talk with him. Okay. All right, is he all right? What are you up to? Well, doing the same old thing, working and everything. Yeah. Hey, how you doing, guys? I'm doing pretty well. I'll be back in New Jersey soon. I'm not here now. When I get out there, I give you a call. There's a couple of things we can discuss. Yeah. Can't really discuss over the phone right now. Okay, well, I'll definitely want to get out there. I just want to make sure there's no immediate problem. There seems to be any, at least right now. So that's good. Okay. All right, Richie. Thanks for returning the call. No problem. Listen, give me a call when you come back and we'll talk. Okay. Okay? Good deal. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, the tape has been played. Any further that you want to offer in this hearing?
No, Your Honor.
Well, I would like to offer the testimony of Mr. Kelly, since there appears to be the distinct possibility that Mr. Kelly was told by someone to make this tape recording. And I'd also like access to the phone records of this agency to see whether in fact a phone conversation took place with Detective Zoll. As I indicate to the court, the entire tape recording consists of a first section which has been omitted from the portion the court heard, in which Mr. Kelly, the boss of the agency, is tape recording the conversation. So it appears, at least there is reason for me to believe, that Mr. Kelly was told by someone to make this tape recording.
Regardless of that, the witness indicated he made this particular tape recording of his own volition, and no one told him to do that. So what his boss did in relationship to another recording that is not being played doesn't have anything to do with what this witness did, unless you're attacking his credibility as to the honesty of his statements here.
It's not a credibility attack, but I thought the witness was saying maybe the reason he recorded it was because Dennis Kelly told him to. And my point is that Dennis Kelly was in turn told by police agencies to record the conversation, then this witness is merely acting at the direction of his boss, who in turn is acting at the direction of law enforcement.
Okay.
I think that would bring within the subsection C provision of New Jersey law.
All right.
I don't think that was the testimony. I think
Well, let me ask the witness, why did you tape record the conversation?
Honestly, Your Honor, because I used to be a police officer. I know that the investigation was being conducted with Lyle, and I wanted to assist the Beverly Hills Police Department with backup.
Okay, did Mr. Kelly tell you to tape record this conversation?
No,
All right. Anything else?
Could I just follow up?
Sure.
Did you say in cross-examination that maybe that was the reason you tape recorded it?
yes, sir.
You did say that?
Yes.
What was the reason?
That the reason you might have tape recorded the conversation was because Dennis Kelly may have told you to do so?
No, I really couldn't. Dennis didn't tell me to do it. I did it on my own.
I brought to your attention the fact that he had tape recorded the first part of the telephone conversation, correct?
Well, I didn't have any knowledge of that.
Didn't I ask you whether one possibility was whether Dennis Kelly had told you to tape record it? And
Yes,
did
he
you
did.
say maybe that's why I tape recorded it?
Yes,
That was your testimony?
yes.
All right, thank you, that's all.
All right, we'll take unless you have some further questioning, we'll take a recess until 1:30 and proceed at that time with the hearing in relationship to Mr. Rand, and other than a continuation potentially of Mr. Wincowski's testimony. Okay, court's still in session, please. Then you're ready with Mr. Stevens, is that right?
Yes, Your Honor.
And after Mr. Stevens,
Amanda Adams.
and she testifies before both juries.
Correct. And then Wesley Gross is the handwriting examiner, and he testifies before both juries, should we get to him. And I'm not going to call Detective Lenningham to the refusal today because I don't think we'll get to him.
Okay,
Because we have to litigate that.
all right. And so we do have some testimony this afternoon that both juries will hear.
If we get through.
All right. And then what is the schedule for tomorrow?
Good question.
And then with regard to Mr. Stevens, he still has a few issues to resolve out of the presence of the court.
Okay,
I'm wondering if you really get to do the
well, then you'll just have to wonder until 4:30 and see whether or not we get to it, because we'll need you here all afternoon.
Oh, no, I intend to be here.
So,
How long will Amanda Adams' testimony take?
I don't know how long your testimony is, but I have very few questions. I don't know how long you're doing.
I don't think it will take that long. Maybe we should put her on next.
well, if you have something, the other jury won't be back until 2:00. If you have something that you could put on for both juries, and then we can excuse that jury for the rest of the day, that's fine. But my question still relates to tomorrow, so that we can give some guidance to the jurors as to when to return.
We'll have to finish with the handwriting issues tomorrow, and then we're going to put on conversations with Detective Zoller, which are in front of separate juries. If this court has a list from yesterday that says Tuesday, July 27th, because what I'm going to do is put Detective Zoller on, because he'll be in front of one jury and then the other, and then in front of both. So it's going to be conversations from September 17th and general investigative things as well, which would come in front of both juries.
We have a clue what general investigative things means, so we know which books to bring.
All right, well, you can talk about that off the record here. So you have a need for both juries tomorrow in the morning, is that correct?
Yes.
All right.
We'll just tailor it so that
Well-
we use them.
Well, focus on it so that if one jury can come in the afternoon and one in the morning, then we can do it that way.
I'll
But
try to look at it.
it doesn't have to be done that way, but if you can, then we can, when I excuse the one jury at this afternoon, I can at least tell them when to return with some better accuracy than today.
Judge, can I add one point on this witness?
Yes.
before I excuse?
Yeah, he's going to come back this afternoon. He's not being excused.
I just wanted to submit one additional item to the court.
Yes.
And one follow-up question. Did you call back the number that Dennis Kelly had given to you to reach Lyle Menendez? Was there an airplane?
No, I don't believe
Can you call an airplane from your office?
so. Yeah.
You can? Do you recall getting a 213 number to call him back?
I don't recall the number, sir.
But it was a number that Dennis Kelly gave to you?
Yes.
I want to submit the entire transcript to the court to indicate that the number that was given was a 213 area code number, which is obviously not an airplane. So I don't think this conversation connects up to the prosecution's offer of proof that this was a conversation which took place in an airplane.
All right, it certainly gave me that impression when the witness testified that it was not a conversation that took place while the defendant was on an airplane.
I agree with the court. That was the information I was given. I will check during lunch.
Okay, well, then that portion of the people's offer of proof fails and that it doesn't relate to Glen Stevens' testimony in that regard.
Well, I'll have to ask Mr. Stevens.
All right. Okay, we'll be in recess till 1:30. And
I wanted to clarify for the record.
Yes.
I spoke with Mr. Stevens about the sequence of events. His recollection is that he was on the plane with Lyle Menendez, and Lyle called the restaurant, not the
hold on a second. Okay, any jurors, let's get them in now so that we can get them in.
Shall I go on?
Well, let's double check. Make sure we don't have any more coming in. Okay, go ahead.
He called the restaurant from the plane and learned some information about the Beverly Hills police having been at the restaurant. It was pursuant to that call to the restaurant that he then gave the things to Mr. Rogers. I don't know this for a fact, but my guess is that the phone call that the court heard before lunch occurred after the plane flight. Because the plane flight was from the New Jersey to the Los Angeles area, and from the evidence offered, that the phone call was at 2213. So it was afterwards. What I would offer the statement for is for the other reasons I stated before, and also as corroborative of the fact that Lyle Menendez knew that the police had been to the restaurant and was expressing concern about it.
And what is the defense response?
Well, that those are uncontested issues, and second of all, the content of this tape recording is not probative of those issues.
What is uncontested?
That Lyle Menendez was aware of the fact that the police were seeking to question him. Assume that's going to come out through the testimony of Stevens, that he gave Stevens this money and made the statement he did about paying it. And I don't see what this tape recorded statement adds to that offer of proof.
And the expression of concern about the police. Is that also in the conversation with Stevens?
I think it is, Your Honor. Off the top of my head, I don't specifically recall, but I think that the thrust of that statement is that he was concerned about the police, and that was the reason he handed the money over to Stevens.
And the argument is then that this is cumulative?
It's cumulative, and it, as I said before, there's also a comment, I think, on his exercising his rights to counsel and his right to remain silent.
Well, on the latter two issues, the case law seems to be against you on that. Mr. Burt, do you have any case that stands for your argument or your position? That a non-custodial defendant confronted by a non-police officer and under circumstances such as this and saying what your client is alleged to have said, that would constitute a comment on the defendant's assertions of Fifth or Sixth Amendment rights. First of all, he's not in custody, so his Fifth Amendment rights don't apply. And the United States Supreme Court in Moran versus Burbine says that the Sixth Amendment only applies once charges are filed.
Well, that's true, but I think if the court looks at the post-arrest cases or the post-custodial cases, they all talk about the reason why that comment on refusal would not be probative is because it may simply be an assertion of rights. So it may not be directly violative of his privilege against self-incrimination or his right to counsel, but the circumstances here indicate that he may have been exercising his rights as given to him by his attorney, and therefore it's not probative of any issue. It doesn't show a consciousness of guilt on his part because he may simply have been following the advice of his lawyer. So it's really more relevancy 352 objection than it is a direct objection under the Fifth or Sixth Amendments.
Well, clearly, if it was an objection under the Fifth or Sixth Amendments, you would not be successful. Would you concede that your argument is only by analogy to the relevance findings of the appellate courts dealing with custodial interrogations?
I would concede it as to the Fifth Amendment. I think the Houston case, which I cited to the court, leaves open whether the right to counsel may be different in this situation.
Houston was a lineup of a person in custody. Is that right?
Correct. I recognize the cases the court cites. I think under those cases, there would be no objection. But the 352 objection does remain.
And as far as the issues relating to surreptitious tape recording, Any further argument on that issue?
No, my position on that is I'm asking the court to conduct a full 1538.5 hearing, and I've indicated to the court that I would like to call Mr. Kelly because it seems unbelievable to me that he would, that this witness would out of the blue simply be tape recording conversations. And I think his last word on the subject was that Mr. Kelly may have instructed him, or possibly that was one of the reasons why he tape recorded these conversations. And if it was, then it's my position it falls under this New Jersey wiretap statute.
Let me ask the prosecution this, regardless of whether there is a tape recording, cannot the witness testify about this conversation?
Yes,
Can he do so without the tape recording being played?
yes.
And have you discussed that with him?
I had him review the conversation before he even took the stand this morning about that, and if the court wants to solve this issue that way, that's perfectly acceptable with the people who may need to refresh his recollection from it. I don't know that he's got it memorized.
Well, what is the defense response to that? The witness referring to a transcript of a tape recording that you contend was possibly obtained in violation of some statute.
Well, I don't think he can make any use of it if that's illegally obtained evidence. But if he can do it independently as an independent source from his own recollection, I think that avoids the wiretap problem. I don't think it avoids the 352 objection.
All right, well, I'll ask that the prosecution confer with the witness, see if he can testify from his own independent recollection so that this issue can be resolved.
He did view the transcript this morning, Your Honor.
Well, I'm just asking you to talk to him and verify that that is how he could proceed so that we can eliminate this issue at this point.
That'd be fine. Shall I go?
Yes.
Here on a Friday and Monday, over the weekend, Monday, I got the call from Lyle.
Okay, but you didn't actually receive the call. You got a message to call him back, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, and he asked you why you and the police detectives had been at Mr. Buffalo's?
yes.
What else happened?
I told him the police officers wanted to look at the store and see where it was located at. And I also told Lyle the police officers, wanted him to call if he had called me for Lyle to contact the cops.
And what did Lyle reply to that suggestion by you?
He said, no, that's all right. Some to that effect, like he wasn't going to call.
Okay, did you have any further conversation with him?
He's told me he was coming out to New Jersey soon and that he wanted to speak to me. I asked him about what, and he said he didn't want to talk about it on the phone.
Is that the end of the conversation?
Basically, yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart.
Mr. Bird?
No questions.
All right, did you wish to be heard further?
No, we submit the matter at this point.
All right, are you testifying from your own recollection of that conversation?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. All right, then the court will permit the testimony. I find that there is relevance to the testimony. It does relate to the state of mind of the defendant and his consciousness of guilt and being told that the police would like to speak with him and his, in essence, his declination or declining to do so. All right. Anything further now on other matters before we have the jury come out? Are we ready on the issue relating to Mr. Rand?
I believe his lawyer's in the hallway.
Yes.
All right. Okay, Mr. Wincowski, you can step down and we'll get back to you very shortly.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I wanted to make brief argument with the court before we actually bring Mr. Rand in.
All right. Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to point out that it appears that there are three issues here that we should address. The first is whether or not the information Mr. Rand published on the news last night is in fact inconsistent with Mr. Goudreau's testimony. If you look at the copy of the transcript at page 7936 from yesterday's testimony, line 19, question, did he ever tell you that he and his brother had been molested by their father? Answer, no, he didn't. Question, have you ever told me that? Answer, I can't recall that I have. The information that was revealed in the published portion last night was not inconsistent with that. I believe it was more in the nature of whether Mr. Boudreau knew about sexual abuse, and it was not whether or not, the question was not, did Lyle ever tell you he'd been abused? Yes, he did. That was not what was in there. Secondly, I think it's clear now from the testimony that the genesis of Mr. Boudreau's suspicions was something Mr. Rand told Mr. Stevens. Mr. Stevens told Mr. Boudreau, who then repeated it or affirmed it to Mr. Rand, and therefore the information is unreliable and therefore should not be presented to the jury. And lastly, if the court does sustain the assertion of the Shield Law, the people are denied the opportunity to cross-examine. And when any party is denied the opportunity to cross-examine, the testimony should be stricken. And so those are the points I wanted to address. And the last one, of course, is the 352 argument. But I think specifically that the information that Mr. Rand has chosen to reveal does not, in fact, contradict his testimony.
May I be heard?
Yes, very briefly.
Your Honor, I think if you continue reading where Mrs. Vizanich began, it becomes very clear that he was asked specifically, and I'm reading at the bottom of the page, she cited 9336, starting in line 26, where I asked him, you don't remember whether you ever told me or anyone else that Lyle Menendez told you he and his brother were molested by their father? Mr. Gross says, I never, and I finished my question in a Chinese restaurant. His answer, I told him I was molested as a child. He never told me he was. I asked him, he never said anything to you about that? Answer, no. So I think he very specifically denied. And I said later on page 7937, starting at line 16, and is it because you want to hear that you have never told anyone that he told you of this incident with his parents, with his father? Answer, no, never told anybody. So I think he clearly denied having had that conversation, having had the conversation either with Lyle or with Bob Rand. And so the information that was published on the news last night is obviously contrary to that. And it's our position that based on the information, a very small part of the tape was played for me, just one line more than what was published in the, on the television last night. I believe more material was played for Mr. Bird, and Mr. Rand said he played 8 minutes, something like that. And I think it becomes clear in that setting that this was not information that was suggested to Donovan Boudreau. It was information he was volunteering on his own.
Well, number one, it does sound inconsistent with his testimony. The issue is whether it's reliably stated on that tape that this was information of Mr. Boudreau's own knowledge or things that were suggested to him by others. That's a question of fact for the jury to resolve, not for the court. The people have stated the position that since Mr. Boudreau would not be available later in the trial, that they have no objection to this evidence being presented at this stage, even though the defendant, Lyle Menendez, has not testified and has not been impeached or his credibility has not been attacked on the basis of recent fabrication, and therefore that this is a prior consistent statement.
That was my position yesterday when we had our sidebar. That was before Mr.
That was your position this morning. You said that Boudreau was leaving the country.
Correct. That is correct. What I would request the court, if this is going to happen, I would request that it all happen. In other words, I want Mr. Rand to testify now as well, and not wait, because I think if the court's going to permit this, which I'm not sure the court is, but if the court should, I think Mr. Boudreau should be available for us so he can explain.
I agree. I think it should all be out there for everyone to look at.
Is the court ruling then that he should be impeached?
No, at this point, I've ruled that the statement that has been played sounds like it's an inconsistent statement with his testimony here. And if that is true, then it can be used. If other foundation can be laid for its admissibility. And before we get to that, you have stated that you wanted to obtain the entire tape recording of that conversation.
Correct, because I don't think I can cross-examine Mr. Rand based upon the little bit that was made available.
And the basis for that is that you feel that the rest of the tape recording might reflect on whether Mr. Rand
suggested things to the witness in the interview that caused the witness to say what he said on this tape.
In addition, I think what he told I'd like to ask him about what he told Mr. Stevens as well. Mr. Stevens has testified that Mr. Rand gave him information about that.
All right, well, let's have Mr. Rand in and we'll deal with that issue first here. All right, yes.
Before we do that, could I just indicate to the court in response to the prosecution's argument that she needs to hear the entire tape, that Mr. Rand did play for me approximately 5 to 8 minutes worth of the tape, and it was representing to me that that was the entire discussion of the abuse. And I can represent to the court that there was a definite context, and he played for me the beginning of it. And the beginning of the tape starts with Mr. Goudreau explaining how the issue of abuse came up, and goes through describing Lyle Menendez admitting that there was abuse, and then the last portion of the tape that was played for me is a discussion by Mr. Goudreau indicating that after Lyle Menendez's arrest, he told Glen Stevens about what Lyle had said to him, and Stevens in turn confirmed his knowledge of abuse. And that's the last portion of the tape that I heard, but I think there's a very definite beginning and end to this discussion, and can give the court in that 5 to 8 minute period of time the entire context which the court and the jury need to listen to in order to determine whether or not Mr. Rand led the witness in some way.
Well, that is, again, for others to decide after hearing the whole tape, rather than what Mr. Rand chose to play for you. And I'm assuming from what you just said that you feel that that whole portion of the tape that was played for you by Mr. Rand should be produced by Mr. Rand so that you could effectively examine Mr. Goudreau.
That's our position, that as to that segment, that is the segment that he played to Ms. Lansing and myself, and specifically the 5 to 8 minute segment that I just referred to, that portion should be made available to both parties and to the jury, and indicate to the court that I believe, based on hearing it myself, that does fully explain the conversation that Mr. Goudreau had with Mr. Menendez, as well as the conversation he had with Mr. Stevens in that time frame.
Okay, well, let's deal with Mr. Rand and his claim of reporter shield and get him in, please. Mr. Rand and his counsel.
There'd also be 2 jurors walking in.
Sure, let them in first, please.
Okay.
Let the jurors in first. All right, we'll now proceed in regards to Mr. Rand, who is back in court. Mr. Rand, do you have counsel with you?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
And who is that?
Good morning, Your Honor. Barbara Carlo for Bob Rand, Robert Rand.
Good afternoon. And this matter is here in regards to a tape recording of Mr. Rand. Who is this other person standing here? All right, you're both representing Mr. Rand in this, is that right?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. And did counsel wish to be heard in regards to this matter?
Yes, Your Honor. I would first of all like to inquire as to the nature of the proceedings. I was called out of deposition quite suddenly, and I'm not up to speed on exactly
Did
what.
Mr. Rand fill you in on what's going on?
I have a copy of the subpoena that was served on Mr. Rand. I would like to know exactly what the prosecution's position is with respect to the tape recordings that are evidently at issue.
Well, you've not spoken with the prosecution?
I have not.
Well, as Mr. Rand probably could tell you, he was on the witness stand this morning and was questioned in regards to a conversation he had with a witness in this criminal trial. And the fact that Mr. Rand was also on television last night was documented by a videotape of the television show in which Mr. Rand played for the television audience a portion of a conversation he had with the witness who's been on the witness stand here. The witness's name is Mr. Goudreau. And the prosecution served a subpoena duces tecum on Mr. Rand to obtain the entire tape of that interview with Mr. Goudreau. And that is why the matter is here.
Your Honor, I would first of all request a continuance based on the fact that, as I stated earlier, was in a deposition all morning. I would request a brief continuance until tomorrow morning, just so that I may properly prepare for this.
Well, Mr. Rand told me that his lawyer was in court this morning, and that he had been served with a subpoena ducis tecum this morning prior to court. And further, the court is aware that Mr. Rand was on television last night and should have been fully aware that this matter would arise during today's proceedings. So he certainly was in a position to arrange for counsel to be present. So your request for a continuance is denied.
May I know, Your Honor, the position of the prosecution with respect to the tapes, the reasons that they are compelling the tapes, seeking to compel the tapes at this point?
Well, I can't speak for the prosecution. That matter has been documented here in court as far as why they're asking for them. What is Mr. Rand's position as far as why he has not complied with a subpoena ducis tecum?
Well, California law recognizes the importance of protecting the news gathering function, and that journalists have a right to refuse to disclose their unpublished information. And the unpublished information would include notes, tape recordings, and photographs.
Are you referring to Section 1070 of the Evidence Code?
I am referring to Section 1070 of the Evidence Code, Your Honor, and also referring to Article 1, Section 2, Subdivision B of the California Constitution.
And who does that section apply to?
That section applies to a publisher, editor, reporter, or other person connected with or employed upon a newspaper, magazine, or other periodical publication. And that section states that such a person cannot be adjudged in contempt by a judicial, legislative, administrative body, or any other body having the power to issue subpoenas for refusing to disclose in any proceeding as defined in Section 901 the source of any information procured while so connected or employed for publication in a newspaper, magazine, or other periodical publication, or for refusing to disclose any unpublished information obtained or prepared in gathering, receiving, or processing of information for communication to the public.
And how do you feel that that section applies to Mr. Rand?
Mr. Rand is a journalist, a reporter. He has been engaged in preparing, gathering information related to a book publishing contract, which he apparently has with Simon & Schuster. He has been engaged in research on this case since 1981. He has had articles appear pertaining to this case in various periodicals, three that I have in front of me. One, the Miami Herald, December 24th, 1989. Two, People Magazine, March 26th, 1990. And three, March 1991, a Playboy magazine in which the Menendez case has been reported upon by Mr. Rand. Mr. Rand is seeking at this point no more than the right to which he is entitled. He should not be made to disgorge the contents of his tapes, which are essentially the fruits of his research. This is consistent again with the California Constitution and California's recognition of the importance of the news gathering function. A court cannot simply pry out of a journalist's hands unpublished information. To do so would tear at the very fabric of the First Amendment. I think there is no dispute about the fact that the prosecution is requesting here unpublished information, not information which has been published.
Are you alleging that Mr. Rand accumulated and acquired this information while connected or employed by a newspaper or magazine or other periodical publication?
Mr. Rand acquired this information as a reporter, as someone who was in the process of writing or preparing to write a book.
How does that qualify under Section 1070 of the Evidence Code?
I believe that he is a person connected with a newspaper, magazine, or other periodical publication, or by a press association or wire service. Again, I refer to.
Why do you say that? What causes you to believe that Mr. Rand is anything but an author preparing for a book?
Well, because I believe, Your Honor, that he has, in fact, reported for various magazines, as I have just stated.
Your Honor, if I could speak.
All right, Mr. Rand, why don't you get back on the witness stand? You were on the witness stand this morning, so let's get you back up there. All right, you're still under oath, Mr. Rand. Did you not testify this morning that the materials you accumulated in this interview were accumulated in connection and solely in connection with the book that you were preparing?
That's correct, Your Honor. At the time that I conducted the interview in March of 1992, I was primarily working on my book, but I have also covered this story for the Miami Herald and am continuing to supply stories for the Miami Herald. In fact, I was in the Miami Herald newsroom this past Friday and met with editors there and consulted with them about upcoming stories I am preparing for the Miami Herald.
All right, and when you acquired the information at issue here, the question is whether or not you were employed by or connected with any news association or press association or magazine, newspaper, or other periodical publication.
Yes, I signed a contract with Simon & Schuster, Inc. in October of 1991 in preparation for a book to be released after the conclusion of this trial.
And when was the interview in question?
The interview was in March 1992.
And was it the interview conducted solely for the purpose of preparing the book?
Well, it was conducted primarily in preparation for the book. However, I am continuing. I've been regularly supplying stories to the Miami Herald Sunday magazine, Tropic Magazine, since 1988, and they have expressed continued interest. And I have also occasionally, at their request, written stories for the daily newspaper. And that association, which began in August of 1989 when the Miami Herald paid for me to come to California to research the story, that association continues to this day.
All right. Do counsel wish to inquire, either the prosecution or defense counsel?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Rand, in addition to my exposure of this case, you've also been interviewed by media as a witness, is that correct?
No.
Well, I believe you indicated this morning that you have been interviewed by other news media,
Yes.
and that's in regard to your knowledge of the case?
Yes.
All right. In March of 1992, were you employed by the Miami Herald?
I was not a staff reporter of the Miami Herald. I was not a staff writer. However, I continued an association which began in 1988 with the Miami Herald.
When's the last time you wrote an article for the Miami Herald?
The last time I wrote an article was in May of 1993 when I wrote an article about this case.
And the time before that?
December of 1989 was the last published article. I have supplied other information and files to the Miami Herald over the entire course of the story.
So you only have had those two published articles?
So the May 1993 article has not been published yet. It is going to be published sometime soon. I was informed this past Friday.
I have nothing further.
Defense wish to inquire?
Go ahead.
Well, let me ask Mr. Burt, have you obtained from Mr. Rand the 8 to 10 minutes that you were seeking in this matter?
No, Your Honor, we haven't obtained any tape from Mr. Rand. The only.
Are you assured that he'll give that to you, therefore you don't have any questions of him?
I'm sorry.
Are you assured that he's going to give that to you and provide that to you since you felt you needed it to conduct your examination?
I think his position is he's not going to give it to either side. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, the portion that was played to Mr. Burt and Ms. Lansing, is it your position you would not turn that over to them?
That's correct.
And why is that?
I feel that because of the California press shield law and as a resident of Florida, under the Florida press shield law, that I should not be forced to turn over unpublished materials.
Well, had you not published it to Mr. Burt when you played it to him on the radio or on the telephone?
It was an off-the-record exchange of a reporter and a source,
And who is the source?
Mr. Bird.
And therefore, you felt that was not a publication?
No, Your Honor.
That's correct? You felt
That's my
not
feeling.
A publication. And did you wish to pursue that at all, Mr. Bird, or are you
Well,
satisfied with the answers?
Clarify to the court, it wasn't revealed to me in a phone conversation. I actually met with Mr. Rand this morning, and that's when he played that segment. It was in person, it was not, but I don't have anything further.
All right, I had assumed that that was done to you in the same time frame it was played for Ms. Lansing. Ms. Lansing, you heard this some earlier times, is that right?
I heard 25 seconds worth of material several months ago. I thought it was about 6 months ago. I think he said it was in May. Well, he played for me the part that was on the air and one sentence beyond that. I think he evidently played a much longer section for Mr. Wood this morning.
And this was in an effort to accumulate information from Mr. Burt. Is that why you played it for him?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. Did you, all right. Anybody else have any further questions? Ms. Abramson, you had something.
I'll ask a few questions if I can, out of place, and then Mr. Burton will come to. Mr. Rand, you remember that several months ago, I ran into you in the criminal courts building downtown, and we had a discussion about this information that Donovan Goudreau had given you.
Yes.
And I wasn't giving you any information during that discussion, was I?
I don't recall specifically the conversation. I'd have to go back to refer to my notes.
And we hadn't set up any kind of confidential, off-the-record communication.
No, it wasn't a formal interview situation. We ran into each other in the hallway.
Right, and you told me when I was talking to you in the hallway that Donovan Goudreau had told you that Lyle Menendez had told him that he and his brother had been molested by their father.
That's correct. I was preparing a story at that time for the Miami Herald, and I was trying to get your reaction to that information.
Well, you didn't tell me, that's why you were telling me. In fact,
Right, that was what was going on.
in fact, I started the conversation. I was sort of angry with you. Do you remember that?
It's probably true.
I've never heard.
Mr. Burt, anything else? Or the prosecution, any questions?
Yes, Mr. Rand, last night, the portion of the tape that you played for Channel 9 News did not contain Mr. Goudreau saying that Lyle Menendez had told him that he had been molested. Is that correct?
I believe it did, but I would have to look at a transcript of it to be certain.
Well, my impression was is that you mentioned sexual abuse, and Mr. Goudreau popped in with something about the baths, taking a bath.
I believe, without having a transcript in front of me, I believe in the portion that was aired on Channel 9 that Mr. Goudreau said, yeah, Eric and Lyle too, they took baths together.
That is not Mr. Goudreau saying that Lyle told him that, correct?
Correct.
Now, did you tell Glen Stevens about them taking baths together? Do you remember doing that?
I'd have to refer to my notes. I've interviewed over 300 people and have thousands of pages of notes over the course of the 4 years since I began researching the story.
Were you aware of the fact that that had occurred, that the boys had taken, as children, little children, had taken baths with their father or something to that effect?
I believe Mr. Goudreau had, I believe Mr. Goudreau had spoken of that.
No, did you know that?
Did I know that?
Yeah, were you told that?
I wasn't there.
Were you ever told that in your investigation of this case?
I would have to refer to my notes to be sure.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Mr. Burt?
Just to clarify, Mr. Rand, you made reference to the fact that you played a segment of the tape for me this morning. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is it true that that meeting with you and I came about because I asked you for a copy of the story tape that was played last night on Channel 9?
Yes.
I came over to your house this morning to pick up that
Yes.
VCR tape, correct?
Yes.
And at that point, you asked me whether I wanted to hear the 5 to 8 minute portion of the tape that referred to Mr. Goudreau's statement concerning Lyle Menendez stating to him he had been abused and also repeating that statement to Mr. Stevens at some later point. Is that correct?
Yes.
Was there any further discussion between the two of us at that point?
No, there wasn't.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Anything else? Did you wish to ask questions of your client?
I would have them,
Yes.
if you can answer it. Mr. Rand, this portion that you played for Mr. Burke this morning, was that the only place in your interview with Mr. Goudreau where the issue of Lyle and Eric being sexually abused by their father was discussed with Mr. Goudreau?
No, I believe there may be one other segment in the interview.
All right, anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay. Are you currently employed by any newspaper?
I'm not a staff employee. However, I have a continuing working relationship with the Miami Herald.
What does that mean? When you submit an article, they might or might not publish it?
Well, they have asked me to call them regularly to provide information on what is happening in this case. And they have asked me to write articles as the case goes along. I have also published an article in Paris Match magazine in France several weeks ago.
Are you employed by Paris Match magazine?
No, Your Honor, I'm not a staff employee. However, I have written articles for them several times over the past few years.
Okay, anything else?
No.
All right, you may step down. Thank you, sir. All right, do counsel wish to argue the matter as far as whether the California Shield Law, Evidence Code Section 1070 applies to Mr. Rand in this situation in relationship to this particular tape recording? Anybody, do you want to argue it? Somebody is asking for this tape, so I assume somebody has a position on it.
Yes, Your Honor. First of all, it's our position that the portions that have already been played for the defense attorneys, be they 25 seconds or 8 to 10 minutes, have been published regardless of whether they're characterized by this witness as being off the record or not. So it's our position that that portion should be obtained. However, I think the entire tape, and that is the entire two and a half hours, should be revealed because I don't think it's very clear at all that at the time that he received the information from Mr. Goudreau that he was in fact employed or connected with a newspaper, magazine, or other periodical publication, press association, or wire service. And so because of that, I don't think the Shield Law applies to him.
All right, do other counsel wish to be heard?
Well, Your Honor, I have to say that I agree with the prosecution to the extent that the portion that was played for Mr. Burke does appear to have been a publication and a revelation of the source and source material. And we agree that that section of the interview is no longer shielded and should be turned over to both sides. However, if I understand the Shield Law, and I don't claim to be a First Amendment expert, if I understand that the portions that are not published are still protected, my only question, and because I'm not an expert in this area, but my only question is whether doing research for a book or having an ongoing interest in a story on behalf of a newspaper with which one has published, and I would assume one has paid him, brings Mr. Rand within the Shield Law. I think he has basically waived part of the Shield Law as to the part that he's published, and he certainly gave me the same, the information, if not directed by playing the tape for me. If he otherwise is covered, I think that section's open, that section of the tape. If he isn't otherwise covered, I don't know that the people have made a showing that the rest of the tape is relevant. I mean, he doesn't just haul information out of any witness's hands unless you can make some kind of showing.
Unless you're a defense counsel, and then you try to get as much as you can.
Well,
Yeah, I'm just being facetious. All right,
no,
Mr. Burt, did you wish to argue the matter?
I know when you're being facetious, but I'm just trying to work my way through rules that I don't really know all that well, and leave it to you as to whether he came under the Shield Law or not. Let me just say, it's obvious for our purposes, which is the truth-seeking process here, and to put all the information out there in front of the jury, that we want as much information as possible as well.
All right, Mr. Burt, did you wish to be heard?
Well, just to indicate to the court, it's our position that the 5 to 8 minute segment has been published and that it appears that Mr. Rand is a person protected by the shield law, since the section refers to someone who has been so connected or employed, and it doesn't seem to be limited to someone who was employed or connected with an agency at the time the information was taken or otherwise. That last sentence that I just referred to.
No, that's the Bill Farr clause that applies to,
Yes.
that was adopted in California to deal with that situation of a person who had obtained the information while connected with a newspaper and then leaves the newspaper and then suddenly finds himself subject to contempt of court and imprisonment.
On the face of it, it seems to apply to someone who, for instance, was writing for the Miami Herald in 1989 and then in March of 1992 is taking the information because that person had been connected or employed to the news.
I'm sure the authors of that code section didn't mean to provide in perpetuity to an individual who once in his or her life worked for a news organization, provide in perpetuity the shield law on all matters that that individual ever got involved with for the rest of their life. It had to be connected with the subject matter of the litigation. Otherwise, you'd have an absurdity there.
Well, I feel uncomfortable being in the position of asserting Mr. Rand's rights since we are seeking the 5-day minute portion. I just point that out to the court. That section does.
All right, let me hear from Mr. Rand's counsel.
I thank Mr. Burke for pointing that out. I was about to point that out to the court. I believe that is that's absolutely so, that any person who is connected with or has been so connected or employed, I think that the purpose of the shield law cannot be so narrowly construed as to abrogate Mr. Rand's rights in this situation. Further, with respect to the 20 seconds or so of the tape that appeared on, I believe it was Channel 9, there's no dispute that that was published. With respect to any other publication to Ms. Lansing, that was an off-the-record conversation, was not intended to be a waiver of any sort, and certainly none of the rest of the tape is should be compelled.
All right, well, we're not so much talking about a waiver, it's just talking about whether something has been published. If it's been published, then the shield of Section 1070 doesn't apply, period.
Your Honor, by what I meant to say was that Mr. Rand did not intend to publish by giving that whatever portion of tape he did give to Ms. Lansing. That was not intended to be a publication. I believe the shield law should still protect.
All right, just to follow through on a discussion relating to when someone is employed, 1070B refers to any person who is connected with or employed by a radio or television station, or any person who has been so connected or employed. Such a person may not be judged in contempt for refusal to disclose the source of any information procured while so connected or employed by the news organization.
Your
So
Honor,
it relates to when the information was obtained and whether the person at that time was connected to or employed by the news organization. The language is very simple and clear cut.
Your
The
Honor,
issue here is whether or not Mr. Rand was so connected or employed.
may I make one
Yes,
further comment?
certainly.
Didn't mean to interrupt
No, go
the
ahead.
court. Also, 1070B states that, or for refusing to disclose any unpublished information obtained or prepared in gathering, receiving, or processing of information for communication to the public.
And your theory is that when once employed, that somehow would shield an individual forever regarding any information gathered for any purpose?
No, Your Honor, but I think in this case, it is clear that Mr. Rand was gathering information on this particular case.
To write a book.
Had published it in various newspapers and magazines over the years, was employed by or was paid for certain stories that he had published, was again paid very recently by the Herald, I believe it is, by the Herald for another such story. And therefore, as to him, in this particular case, I think the shield law does apply and should apply.
All right, well, anything further from anybody?
No, Your Honor.
All right, based upon what has been presented to me, I find that Mr. Rand conducted this interview of Mr. Goudreau at a time when he was neither connected with or employed by any news organization, whether it be a newspaper, a magazine, or other periodical publication or press association or wire service, that he conducted this interview solely in preparation for a book that he was writing. He so testified this morning, and the court finds in both reviewing his testimony this morning and this afternoon that that is how and why the interview occurred. Therefore, the shield law under Section 1070 of the Evidence Code does not apply to Mr. Rand. It was written to apply to a certain limited class of individuals, and Mr. Rand does not fall within that class. He is neither employed by or associated with any of those organizations enumerated in Section 1070. Therefore, he cannot claim the shield that is provided by Section 1070 of the Evidence Code. Therefore, the court would order that Mr. Rand turn over to the person that subpoenaed the documents, the audio tape that is an issue in this case.
Is Your Honor speaking of the one Goudreau audio tape interview?
As I understand it, it might be on more than one tape or cassette. Is that correct?
Well, it is on two tapes, Your Honor, but I'm uncertain as to your ruling. Are we speaking of the one section that's been discussed here?
No, that the entirety of the tape, which I told you to bring here.
Yes, I have.
You're ordered to turn it over to the prosecution.
Can we get a copy of it?
Well, one thing at a time. Do you have it here?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. That's the order. Turn it over. All right, to the prosecution, and counsel can have an opportunity to review it before we get to the testimony here. So it's my understanding it's 2 hours long. Is that correct?
About 2.5.
Okay, well, they'll have to have time to listen to it. So do you have other witnesses this afternoon that can be heard before we get to this?
Yes.
Okay, then we'll take a short break and proceed.
We're gonna finish Mr. Wincowski, then we're gonna do Miss Adams, and then Mr. Eric Menendez is first and go home.
Okay, we'll be in recess.
We're going to bring these witnesses back, then Mr. Rand and Mr. Goudreau tomorrow.
Your Honor,
Your Honor.
may I ask one question? This apparently is Mr. Rand's only copy. Is he to be allowed to make a copy to give to the prosecution?
Well, they can do it with the assurance that they won't destroy the original.
Okay, I can't make the copy here, I'll have to make it at home on my machine tonight.
The only issue is to get it so that it doesn't delay the trial. We've already lost half a day
On this, so
I don't wanna waste any time, but
Someone from your office.
Your Honor, can I do it this afternoon and bring it right back this afternoon?
well, let me see if they have some way of doing it real quickly here, and we'll take a short break and find out how we can do it so that we get it back to you. All right, we'll now proceed with the trial, and we have Mr. Wincowski back on the witness stand. Would you state your name again for the record, please?
Richard Wenskoski.
All right, sir, I'll remind you, you're still under oath.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Wincowski, sometime in late February of 1990, several months after you had guarded Lyle Menendez, did you have a visit from the Beverly Hills police detectives assigned to the case?
Yes, ma'am.
And where did they visit you, please?
They visited me at the office of D.B. Kelly,
What city is D.B. Kelly in?
Piscataway,
Piscataway.
Piscataway, Piscataway.
And was one of the people that visited you, Detective Zolman, who seated at the council table?
Yes, ma'am.
And was he with the partner officer?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you and Detective Zolman go someplace?
Yes, we did.
Where did you go?
We went to Mr. Buffalo's in Princeton, New Jersey.
And what is Mr. Buffalo's?
It's a restaurant that specializes in hot buffalo wings.
And when you went to that restaurant, did you talk to the manager of the restaurant?
Yes, ma'am.
Shortly after that, did you receive a message to call Lyle Menendez?
Yes, I did.
How many days after yours and the detective's visit to Mr. Buffalo's was it that you got the message to call Lyle Menendez?
We visited the establishment on a Friday, and I received the message on a Monday, a weekend, 2 days later.
Right, and did you in fact call Lyle Menendez back?
Yes, ma'am.
And from the area code that you called, could you tell what state you were calling?
Yes, California.
And did you in fact speak with Lyle Menendez when you made the phone call?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, could you tell us what the conversation was about, please?
Lyle wanted to know why the Beverly Hills cops and myself went to Mr. Buffalo, went to his restaurant. He wanted to know if there was a problem there.
And what did you tell him?
I told him there wasn't any problem, that the police officers just wanted us to go with them and to Mr. Buffalo's.
Did he ask you if you knew anything about why they were there?
Yes, and I told him I didn't really know why they were there. They were looking at the restaurant, wanted to see what kind of establishment it was. And
Did you suggest anything to him that he should do?
yes, I told him that he should call the Beverly Hills Police Department and ask them why they were there.
What was his reply when you made that suggestion?
He stated, no, he let me believe he wasn't going to make any phone calls.
Did you have any further conversation with him?
Yes, he stated that he was coming out to Jersey, New Jersey, in a matter of a couple of days or something, and that he wanted to talk to me.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing further.
Cross-examination.
Am I correct that 2 Beverly Hills detectives flew all the way across country to take you to a chicken wings restaurant? Is that what happened?
Well,
Detective, also speculation on part of the witness.
Sustained.
Well, where were you when the detectives first came up to you and asked you to go to this restaurant?
I was at work and at the offices of DB Kelly.
And all of a sudden they appeared in around the end of February 1992, was it?
Yes,
And they said, why don't you join us? And you got in the car and they drove you somewhere, right?
yes.
And they didn't tell you where you were going or why they wanted you to come with them?
They said that they were going to Mr. Buffalo's and they wanted to look at the restaurant that Lyle had bought.
Did they say why they wanted you to go along with them?
No.
And so you drove over to the restaurant with them, and what'd you do when you got there?
Well, we sat down and had some very hot buffalo wings.
How were they?
Good.
Okay. What else did you do?
We spoke to the manager. We asked him if, I don't know if we asked him if Lyle was around or not. I personally didn't. But I know, I believe Les asked the manager, how's everything going, I think possibly we did ask if Lyle was there. And he says, no, Lyle wasn't around.
And that's all that took place?
We sat and ate lunch and then we left.
And nobody took any photographs or conducted any more interviews other than what you just indicated?
No.
And then is it your testimony that a couple of days later, Lyle Menendez, you returned a call? Lyle Menendez had called your boss and had the boss call you back?
That's correct.
You called him back, correct?
Yes.
And he wanted to know what the problem was?
Yes,
You told him you didn't know what the problem was?
that's correct.
You told him you didn't know why you were taken to the chicken wing restaurant, correct?
That's correct.
He asked you how you were doing,
Yes, he did.
and that was the end of the conversation.
Basically, beside the point that he said he was coming up to New Jersey in a couple of days and he wanted to talk to me.
And that's the last time you spoke with him or talked to him?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Anything else?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you. You may step down. You're excused.
Thank you, Ron.
All right, and you ready with your next
Yes,
witness?
sir.
Oh,
We required an extra jury.
okay. We'll get the other jury in, and as soon as that jury arrives, we'll proceed. So you folks just stay where you are, and we'll get the other jury from next door. And the Eric Menendez jury has entered the courtroom, and a belated good day to you all. Actually, we just wanted to make sure you would get acclimated in the courtroom next door and wanted to make sure everything was okay over there.
It's home now.
I apologize, but as I told this jury, and this jury, unfortunately for them, this jury was pretty much kept in the jury room here for a good period of time as well, that these trials, any trial, whether it's civil or criminal, and especially criminal trials, result in hearings that occur periodically where the court has matters to discuss with counsel. When we know in advance that these things are going to happen, we try to give you notice of it so that you don't have to come in and be inconvenienced. But sometimes these things just sort of crop up out of nowhere and have to be dealt with as they arise. And that's what happened today. And it took a little longer than we had anticipated, but we're sorry for the delay. A couple things. I've mentioned this before. You should not speculate or be concerned about or wonder about what it is that we discuss during those hearings. Those are just legal matters that deal with things that the court has to resolve before the trial proceeds, and you shouldn't be concerned about those matters. And also, likewise, when there is evidence or testimony being heard by only the Lyle Menendez jury, you should not be concerned about or wonder about what is transpiring during those sessions. Those matters only relate to the Lyle Menendez jury and don't concern you, and you must not speculate or be concerned about them in any way. Let me ask those 18 of you who just came in whether any of you have seen or heard anything about this case since the trial started.
No.
Okay. All right, then let's proceed. The people may call their next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. People call Amanda Adams.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you may give in the cause of hearing before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please take the stand and state your name for the record.
My name is Amanda Ann Adams Geyer.
Did you spell your last name?
G-E-I-E-R.
All right, Mr. Kuriyama.
Can the people in the microphone, if I can call you?
Yeah. You can rotate it up there.
Yeah, right here. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Adams Geyer, directing your attention to August 18th, 1989. Were you employed?
Yes,
Where were you employed?
Big Five Sporting Goods in San Diego on Convoy Street.
Is that at 4838 Convoy Street?
Yes, it is.
Were you working on August 18th, 1989?
Yes, I was.
Do you recall when it is you came onto your shift?
12:30.
In the afternoon?
Yes,
Now, what was your position there?
I was the second assistant manager.
Do you recall on that day making a sale of two Mossberg 12-gauge shotguns model 50406?
Vaguely, yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may. Yeah. This relates to an exhibit.
Yes, Your Honor. Adams Geyer, I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 52, several documents. So I'm going to ask you to take a look at what is a yellow sheet of paper that's entitled Firearms Transaction Record Part 1, Intrastate Over the Counter. Do you recognize that form?
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize it?
These are the forms we use when we sell guns in our store.
Do you recognize the writing on that form?
Yes, it's mine.
Is a copy of that form a duplicate? Is this a duplicate of that
Yes,
form?
it is.
All right, we have two of those. If you intend to use those during the trial, during this witness's testimony, we can get the other one for the other jury.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Give your co-counsel a chance to do that.
The record, Your Honor, counsel pointed to exhibit 53.
Yes, the blow up of Exhibit 52. Thank you.
Should I stand here, Your Honor?
Yes, that would be fine. Thank you. All right.
Now, what does this form tell you?
This tells you who purchased the gun, the type of gun that's purchased, how many, the price they paid, phone number, address, who is the employee who took care of the sale of the gun.
Okay, taking a look at this form, the face of this form, who filled out this form?
I filled out the top portion above where the questions are answered.
And those are numbers 1 through 7?
Mhm.
Is that correct?
Yes. I also filled out the date next to the signature, and I filled out the bottom portion from the driver's license down to my signature at the bottom.
Okay. Would you take this yellow highlighting pen, with the court's permission, and highlight the areas of this particular form that were filled out by the purchaser? Yes. Would you also do that on Exhibit 52? Ma'am, you've indicated that you filled out the portions 1 through 7, correct?
Yes.
Would you describe for the jurors how it is that you fill these forms out, what information you need to take down, what information you require to be shown by the customer?
Okay, the customer must produce a California state driver's license. When we do the sale of the gun, in this particular case, at the time we were taking the person's driver's license, writing it down ourselves in the top portion. We asked the person if the addresses on the driver's license were current at that time. If they say no, then we proceed to have them give us a verbal correction on the address and write that down. We write down the driver's license number.
Do you recall at this time whether or not the person who presented this particular driver's license, that of Donovan Gaudreau, had indicated to you that there was a change of address?
Yes, the person making the purchase said that the address was not current on the driver's license and gave me the address that you see now on the form.
That being in Section 563 August Street, San Diego, California, 92117?
Correct.
And when the person comes in with a driver's license, do you check the person to see whether he is similar to the person described in on the driver's license?
Yes, we do.
Now, it indicates that the height of the Donovan Gaudreau is 6'1" and the weight is 165, correct?
Yes.
Did you look at the person that was presenting this driver's license to see if he generally matched that in stature, physical stature?
Yes.
In line 9, you place down a CDL. What does that mean?
California driver's license.
And in line 10, what does that number, that letter and the following numbers designate?
That's the number on the driver's license.
And you wrote that yourself?
Yes, I
You
did.
verified that yourself?
Yes.
With respect to the other portions of the form, could you describe for the jurors what that information indicates?
The bottom half?
Yes.
That indicates the type of shotgun or the type of gun that was purchased, whether it be a rifle or a shotgun, the model number of the gun, which is the 50406, the caliber of the gun, which is the 12 gauge, the serial number on that particular gun, which is the 2K452565, and the manufacturer, which is Mossberg.
And then finally, there's a line 18. Is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
And at that time, you were the second assistant manager?
Yes.
And then did you place the date?
Yes, I did.
Going to the reverse side of Exhibit 52, the first sheet, which is a yellow sheet, there appears to be two receipts, correct?
Yes.
What is that?
Those are the receipts for the purchase of the 2 guns. If you're purchasing more than 1 gun, each gun is rung up separately into the register to show that there were 2 guns purchased.
I'm putting the receipts face up rather than the reverse side of the sheet. What information is reflected on the receipts themselves?
The date that it was purchased, the store number it was purchased at, the 4473 number, which is the federal form number assigned to the purchase, the amount of the purchase plus tax, and the amount of cash tendered and the change, as well as the receipt numbers at the bottom.
How much is at that time, how much was a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun?
It was $199.99.
And it indicates that the person gave you $220,
Correct.
and you gave change back of $601.
Yes, the cashier did.
Does that indicate whether this was a cash transaction?
Yes.
Was it in fact a cash transaction?
Yes, it was.
Now there are 2 receipts, correct?
Yes.
Now, why is it that you have to have 2 receipts?
It's just company policy. We show that we ring up each gun separately as a separate transaction to show that they were both paid for.
That's a rule of Big 5?
Yes.
There are 2 other documents among Exhibit 52. Let me show you first of all. Okay. Go to the next page on 52. A listing for page 29. Do you have the original to this before you?
Yes, I do.
Okay. What form is this?
This is the logbooks that are kept in our store by our store, indicating when and where guns were signed out to or sold. It's a record kept strictly for our company to keep track and inventory our guns.
Which exhibits are you referring to?
This is in 52, Your Honor.
Exhibit 52.
And the corresponding exhibit, the blow up is what?
Is 53.
Well, is it A, B, C, or?
This one happens to be unmarked at this time. There's a 52A and B, which is the yellow sheet, front and back. There is page 36, which is C. So this would appear to be D.
Or has it not been marked?
It has not been marked. That's the grand jury. Yeah, it does not have a green superior court.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you. So we'll designate it by page number, page 29. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
What is that?
That's the logs that we keep in the store to keep track of when guns came into our store from the warehouse and when they were signed out and sold, either transferred or sold to a customer. This is a corresponding half of another sheet that has the guns and the actual serial numbers listed.
Okay, so.
All right, that has now been marked with a sticker 52D, is that correct?
Yes, I'll put the 52.
All right, and the enlargement will have the corresponding designation of 53D.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, with respect to what's been marked as 52D, this is a Big 5 document?
Yes.
And there's a corresponding sheet you indicated.
Yes.
Now, how is that set? Do you have a logbook?
Yes, we have a logbook.
Now, where it says Federal Firearms Record, you indicated there was a corresponding sheet.
Yes, there's a sheet that would match the other half of that sheet with the same page number. And for every line that you see there, there's a corresponding line with the gun, the serial number, the date it came into the store, the type of gun it is, And then the lines here where there are customer signatures means that those persons bought the gun that it matches on the other line.
So the log on the reverse or the matching side would list guns as they came into your store.
Right, correct.
And would that account for the differing dates?
Those dates there are when the guns were purchased and signed out by the customer. So the variance in dates is just when that particular gun was purchased. They're not purchased in any particular order. It's just when that customer purchased the gun. The other sheet would have consecutive dates as to when the shipments came into the store. But the dates on this side of the log sheet are just random as to whenever the gun was purchased or left the store.
With respect to the purchase or the sale of a Mossberg shotgun that was made on August 18th, is there the sale reflected on this document 52D?
Yes, it is.
53D.
Yes, it is.
Would you mark in yellow on 52D that entry, and then also on the enlargement 53D?
Do you want me to take it out here?
Yes. With respect to 53D, the date designates the date of the sale.
Yes.
What is the 415 designate?
That is the 4473 number, which corresponds to the yellow sheet up in the corner. That's the firearms transaction number.
And the customer, do you watch the customer sign that document?
Yeah, we'd watch them sign it, but it's not crucial that we have an exact signature. This is strictly for our records to show when and where the gun purchased. Sometimes the salesperson will fill it out, but the customer signed in that instance himself.
And with respect to the date and the city, who usually fills that out?
It could have been done by the customer, or it could have been done by the salesperson, whoever's at the counter waiting to sign out the gun after it was paid for. Sometimes they'll fill that information in, so when the customer gets back to the counter, they just have to sign. Or sometimes the customer fills out the whole thing as far as the signature and the address.
Okay, and you made this sale?
I made the sale, but I didn't necessarily sign out this portion once the gun was paid for.
However, you did fill out 52A, this form.
Yes, I filled out that form.
Going to 52C. That's page 36. You've indicated that 2 Mossberg shotguns were sold to the same customer, correct?
Yes.
Looking at 52C, and this will be the corresponding 53C. Do you see an entry that was made regarding the purchase of a second Mossberg shotgun by the same customer?
Yes, line 13 on the right side. Mm-hmm.
Okay, would you take that yellow pen and do the same thing that you've done on the other entry? That is on 52C. You're indicating line 13. And then also on your large bits. Thank you. you remember about what time the sale took place?
To the best of my knowledge, and I'm not positively clear on this, but I do recall the sale being in the evening, sometime around 8 o'clock or after.
Do you recall any of the particulars about the sale itself?
The only particulars that come to my mind are when the customer came into the store. I believe I stepped out of the office, the customer standing right there where the gun counter is, which is located right next to our office, and indicated that he wanted to buy 2 of the shotguns and pointed at him. And I recall vaguely asking if he wanted to see the guns. Most customers like to look at them and play at them first before they purchase them.
No, I'm gonna move to strike that, it's not responsive.
Objection overruled, the answer will stand. Please ask the next question.
Thank you. What happened next?
And the person said, no, that's what I want. And from there, I just went in the back, brought the 2 guns out. We did the paperwork. Person went to the front to pay the cashier. And at that point, I don't really remember whether or not I signed out the gun or if one of my part-time employees signed out the gun.
On the second transaction, the purchase of the second gun, did the customer give you, again, $220 cash?
He would have given it to the cashier. I was not at the register.
But does the receipt indicate that?
Yes.
And that change of $6.01 was returned to the customer?
Yes.
Just the same as the first transaction?
Right.
According to the paperwork that you have in front of you, taking a look at the receipts, was any ammunition purchased on that day?
Objection, Your Honor, call for speculation.
Are you referring to something that happened in her store?
Yes,
College?
with those documents in front of her.
According to these receipts,
Go ahead.
according to these receipts, they do not indicate the ammunition was sold, but we do not ring up the ammunition on the same receipts. So I have no knowledge of any ammunition being sold, but it could have been sold.
Do you recall in this transaction that ammunition was sold?
I do not recall.
Are you familiar with that particular model of Mossberg shotgun?
Yes, I am.
How many shots does that shotgun have?
It'll hold 5 in the receiver and 1 in the chamber if you take the plug out. If you don't take the plug out, it'll hold 2 in the receiver, 2 in the chamber, 1 in the receiver. 2 in the receiver, 1 in the chamber.
Meaning it could be as little as 3, but as much as 6?
Exactly.
What is it that you have to do to the shotgun to make it capable of being a 6-shot?
There is a 6 to 7 inch dowel that is in the receiver that you must unscrew the barrel and remove.
And what does that entail?
You just have to unscrew the barrel where it's attached to the receiver, slide the barrel off. There'll be an empty hole there where the screw went in. Tip it upside down. There'll be a 6-inch dowel and you have to pull it out. Sometimes there's a little rubber gasket on it. You just have to pop it out.
Hold a moment, Your Honor. Geyer, how long do you think that this transaction took?
Just guesstimating probably 15, 20 minutes.
Could you identify the person that made the purchase?
No, I can't.
Are there any other forms of identification? I know in this case, the person presented a California driver's license. Are there other forms of identification that are acceptable?
Military identification is acceptable only if they have proof of residency in the state of California. Any identification used has to prove residency in the state of California.
For example, what other
And it has to be a picture ID. For proof of residency, along with military ID, probably their orders stating how long or when they were assigned into the state. something like a phone bill with an address on it dated 6 months prior, or car insurance, something that's dated 6 months prior showing a California state and their name, address.
How old do you have to be to purchase a gun at that time anyway, in 1989? How old did you have to be?
For shotguns and rifles, 18.
You got to be an adult.
Yes.
Were there more than one person there when you made this transaction? Actually making the purchase?
I don't recall there being more than one person up at the counter.
Thank you. I have nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Thank you.
Are you using a double last name, Adams
I just
Geyer?
got married in May, so I'm actually using Geyer, but
Okay.
all the other stuff had Adams on it, so.
All right, but it's okay if I call you Mrs. Geyer. That's
Sure,
all right
whatever
with
you like.
Now, Mrs. Geyer, do you remember when it was that anyone first brought this particular transaction to your attention?
It was in March of 1990.
And in March of 1990, who was it that first brought this transaction to your attention?
It was Les and his partner.
Detective Zoller?
Yes, Detective Zoller.
And his partner, Tom Linehan?
I don't recall his name, but.
Where was it that you first came in contact with Detective Zoller?
At Big Five Sporting Goods.
The store that you work in?
Yes.
And do you recall what date in March of 1990 that was?
March 14th.
And do you know that, have you been provided with copies of your previous statements?
Yes.
That's how come you remember that
Yes.
date? Okay. Have you also been provided with a copy of your testimony from last year before the Los Angeles County Grand Jury?
Yes, I have.
Now, do you recall that when Detective Zoller showed you the ATF form, that's how I'm going to refer to that top document, the firearm transaction record. It's commonly known as the ATF form, isn't it? For alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
Correct.
When he showed you that form in March 14th of 1990, you told him that you did not remember the sale at all, correct? You had no recollection of who bought the guns, male, female, 1, 2, what time of day it was, nothing.
Not at the top of my mind, no.
Okay. And you said you didn't remember the driver's license specifically that was used for the sale.
Meaning?
He asked you if you remembered the license that you were shown. Do you remember telling him you didn't?
I don't remember. Yeah, I remember telling him I didn't recall it.
Okay. And do you recall Detective Zoller asking you if the person, the purchaser, who filled out the form resembled the picture on the driver's license?
Yes, I do remember him asking.
And do you remember telling him that you don't remember if he did or not, but you assumed that he did?
Right, correct.
And do you recall that Detective Zoller showed you what are called photo lineup cards?
Correct.
And that's a card that has the pictures of 6 people on each card?
Correct.
And he showed you 2 different cards?
Yes.
And you selected a number of a person who you said looked familiar to you, but not in reference to the sale because you didn't remember the sale. Is that correct?
Correct.
Last August 1992, you testified before the grand jury, correct?
Correct.
And isn't it true that you testified under oath before the grand jury that you didn't recall whether the individual to whom you sold the guns was alone or with somebody?
Correct.
And you did not, when you testified before the grand jury, give any specifics of this transaction at all. Nothing about the time of day, nothing about the person being alone at the counter, nothing.
Correct.
And you have never stated, at least in any of the reports or the testimony that you've reviewed, you never said anything about asking the person if the address on the license was their most recent address and receiving some new information, have you?
I remember stating that before, but I don't know if it's been on any of the forms for those testimonies, but I have been asked that before and I have stated it.
So you think you told someone that before, but you've read your reports and you read the testimony and it doesn't appear in
It's not on the grand jury testimony. No, it's not.
And it's not in the report of March 14th, is it?
No, it's not.
And it's not on the report of June 21st, 1993 that you gave to Detective Zoller the last time you spoke to him?
I don't recall that.
Okay. Now, did something happen between last August and now that makes you think you remember this transaction?
After looking at paperwork and reviewing schedules and stuff, certain things come back to you. I mean, I can't point out a picture of who was there to make the purchase, but, you know, looking at the situation and the circumstances and going back in time as to what was going on at that time in the store, some things do come back.
So
at the time that Detective Zoller talked to me, no, I did not remember anything off the top of my head.
And you apparently didn't remember anything as of last August either. So when was your paperwork review?
It's been reviewed all along.
So you're making certain deductions, aren't you, based on who was working what shifts and who else was working at the store? You're sort of deducting your way back to this transaction.
Yeah.
You don't really remember the person at all, do you?
I don't remember the person as far as looks or anything. I do remember, you know, looking at the transaction, the receipts, who was there. I do vaguely remember parts of the sale, but I can't point out a person per se. And I do know the procedures and what would have went on. So I can say that, you know, yes, I did look at a driver's license. Yes, I did write this down. Yes, I did ask if this address was correct.
Because you always do that.
I always do that.
All right. So some of it is deduction and some of it is your usual custom and practice. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
But none of it, I think you said before, is actually the picture in your mind of this event. Is that correct?
As far as a person, I didn't spend a lot of time with the person. The people I remember the most are people who want to sit there and discuss guns, and those are the people who repeatedly come in our store, ask questions, play with the guns. This was a, you know, quick in and out, I want two of those, and leave it at that sale.
Well, when did you remember that part? The I want two of those part. What in the paperwork, for example, that you reviewed told you that?
Nothing in the, just looking at the circumstances, looking at our schedules of who is working, looking at my schedule, just, if you want to say it's deduction, you can say it's deduction.
Okay. Deduction as contrasted with memory.
Right. I did tell this to Cindy Erdelay, your investigator, when she spoke to me a while back also.
I know. She spoke to you in May 27th, and that was actually the first time anybody ever wrote down or you ever told anybody about these details, and then you spoke to Detective Zoller less than a month later. All right. Sorry. All right. So you spoke to Cindy, my investigator, May 27th, 1993, right?
Correct.
And to the best of your recollection, is that the very first time you told anybody the result of your deductions?
Anybody who's in contact with this case, I might have discussed it with my other manager who was there when we've had other discussions about the case.
All right. So are you relying to some extent then on what yet other people have been deducing, like your managers?
No.
Okay. So Cindy is the first person connected with the case that you gave these deductions to. Okay. Now, was this time in August '89, close to the beginning of the hunting season?
It's close to right before dove season is September 1st.
Okay. And at that time of year, just before the start of the dove hunting season, does that Big Five store usually have a lot of shotgun ammunition, hunting type ammunition, stacked on the floor in front of the gun counter?
Yes.
And is it your belief that on August 18th, 1989, there were such stacks of shotgun game ammunition on the floor in front of the counter?
Yes.
Now, if I understand your testimony, the procedure would be that I came to you and I said, I want to buy that gun. You would then make out the ATF form. That would be the first thing.
Correct.
Okay. and I'd give you identification, and you'd make out your part, and I'd sign my part.
Correct.
Now, at that point, you don't hand the gun over to me, though. I have to go pay for it.
Correct.
So I take that ATF form, that yellow form, and I go to a cashier, and I tender to the cashier the money necessary to purchase the gun.
Correct.
And if there are two guns there, that cashier is going to ring it up as two different transactions.
Correct.
And if there are 10 guns, she's going to ring it up as 10 different transactions.
Correct.
And every register receipt for each individual gun will then be stapled to the back of that form for your inventory control for the federal government.
Correct.
Now, if I pay at the cashier, I come back to you now with the receipts attached to the form, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, you're ready to give me the guns, but we have to log it out.
Correct.
And so that's when the entries are made in the logbook.
Correct.
And then you hand me my purchase.
Correct.
Now, there's nothing stopping me after you've handed me those guns, and as I'm walking back towards the cashier, from picking up boxes of the shotgun ammunition that's stacked in front of your counter and paying for it on the way out.
Correct. Could also have been paid for at the time when they went up to pay for the guns.
Sure, and that wouldn't show up on the receipts that are attached to that form.
Correct.
Because ammunition sales do not have to be attached to any kind of federal form.
Correct.
And did I understand you correctly? It's the store policy, in fact, to ring up the gun sale just as the gun sale.
Correct. It was at that time. Now the computers are different, so it's done a little differently.
Okay, but we're interested in 1989. Now, just drew a complete blank. It's interesting. Did the store in 1989 carry more than one brand of shotgun shell?
Of shotgun shell, yes.
And can you tell us, for dove hunting season, what are the size shotgun shell, the size of the pellets that are most suitable for that sort of hunting?
For dove hunting?
Mm-hmm.
Generally 7.5 or 8.
And do some of the shot shells, in fact, for dove hunting, say dove load right on them?
Yes.
Now, is it your recollection, first of all, do you still carry this model number, this Mossberg
Yes, we do.
50406?
Yes, we do.
When Detective Zoller came down there in March of 1990, did you show him one?
I don't recall whether or not I showed him one.
Has anybody connected with the prosecution in this case contacted you and asked whether or not you've got a 50406 around?
Maybe not me particularly. There's 3 other managers in the store, so they.
But I don't have him here, so did they contact you?
Not to say whether or not I had one in the store at that time. I don't recall anybody asking me.
What I'm asking, in case I'm confusing you, is has anybody from the prosecution asked if they could either get or examine or buy a 50406 Mossberg from you now?
I don't recall.
And is it your testimony that this particular model shotgun from Mossberg always has that wooden dowel in it?
Yes, it does.
Now, is it your testimony that the dowel slides into the barrel, or does it slide into the
receiver?
The receiver. That's where you would load the shot shells.
Correct.
Okay, so it's just a piece of wood, isn't it?
Yes.
That fills up part of the receiver.
Right.
So you can't put more than 2 shells in there.
Correct.
And all you have to do is unscrew the cap at the end of the receiver, and out spills the dowel.
Correct. Well, you have to pull it a little bit because it's got a rubber gasket on it, but it's fairly simple to get out.
Okay, you said sometimes it does, and sometimes they come without it.
Without the rubber gasket, yeah. Different models have different.
But it's not hard to remove, and as far as you know, most people who buy shotguns remove them.
They can't remove them if they're going to use them out in the hunting field. It's required to have them in there for fish and game. You can't have more than 2 shells in the receiver. But for any other used home protection, I don't believe it's against the law to take it out.
Okay, and whether it's against the law or not, you don't know if people who even use it for hunting are taking it out. Nothing happens unless there's a game warden around.
Right,
catches them.
exactly.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have nothing further.
Any examination by?
Lyle Menendez?
No, Your Honor.
All right, any redirect?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. It's Adam Dyer. Now, you indicated that it wasn't until March 14th, 1990, almost 7 months after you had made the sale, that the police were able to locate those documents that you've testified to today, correct?
Yes.
Objection, that calls for speculation as to what the police are able to do.
Objection sustained.
The answer is stricken.
As far as you know, the day that you saw Detective Zoller on March 14th, 1990, was that the first time that those documents had been shown to the police?
Objection on calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Did you give those documents to the Beverly Hills detectives on March 14th, 1990?
I did not personally. I believe my head manager, Reggie Clevitt, dealt with them as far as giving them the paperwork.
Your Honor, I'm going to
But-
object to that and have to strike it based on personal observation.
All right, the objection sustained. The answer is stricken. You can
Okay,
pursue
thank you,
it
Your Honor.
further.
This Reggie Clevitt, he's the manager of Big Five?
Yes, he's the
At that time?
manager. At that time and now.
On March 14th, 1990, did you see those documents in your store?
Yes.
Now, you said in cross-examination that on May 27th, 1993, a defense investigator by the name of Cindy Utterly came to see you,
Yes.
and you gave her certain information,
Yes.
certain things you remember.
Yes.
Did
Your
you-
Honor, I'm going to object and have to strike it. No foundation.
Objection overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. You recall this defense investigator, Cindy Utterly, coming to see you?
Yes, she came to see me in my home.
Was this in San Diego?
Yes.
Did you give her certain information?
We just discussed the case for about 30 minutes.
You indicated that you recalled at that time, and you told the defense investigator that you recalled that it was one man who knew what he wanted that came in and bought the shotguns that day?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for hearsay, no foundation.
Overruled.
I told Cindy Erdelade that I did not see the customer at point of entry into the store. I did not know whether there was another person with them who might have been shopping around. I only recall, and this is vaguely, that there was only one person at the counter. That's what I told Cindy Erdelade.
Did you tell Cindy also that the person appeared to know what he wanted
Yes.
and said he wanted the two Mossberg shotguns?
Yes.
And then thereafter, did you then call Detective Zoller at the Beverly Hills Police Department?
I had talked to him some point after, but I don't believe I directly called him for that purpose.
However, did you give him that same information that you had given to the defense investigator?
I had mentioned it to him, and he told me that I hadn't told him that before.
Now, do you recall testifying before the grand jury in August of 1992?
Yes.
Do you recall making this statement? I had the driver's license in my possession when I filled out the form. Question. Now, if someone were to present you with a driver's license and had had a change of address, would they advise you of that orally? And your answer, I ask every time if the information on the driver's license is correct. Question. If the person says no, then you would fill out the new address, and you answered correct. Do you
Yes.
remember testifying to that?
Yes, I do.
Finally, that there has been some cross-examination about dove loads, the ammunition. Did
Yes.
the person buying these two Mossberg shotguns tell you that he was going to go dove hunting?
Not that I recall, but I don't remember much of a conversation at all with the person, or even having one other than filling out the paperwork.
Thank you. I have nothing further at this time.
Any further cross?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You may step down. You're excused.
Thank you.
All right, let me see counsel at the sidebar, please. All right, what we've been doing, ladies and gentlemen, is discussing the schedule here and trying to decide when to have each jury return so that we don't inconvenience you any more than we've already done so. As far as the Lyle Menendez jury is concerned, we still have more to do today. There'll be a short break. I have a matter I want to discuss with the lawyers, and then we'll resume with the Lyle Menendez jury. And with the Eric Menendez jury, we'll
have you back tomorrow afternoon, and we'll resume with you tomorrow at 1:30. And there might be a little bit of further testimony for the Lyle Menendez jury tomorrow afternoon as well, and then you might be able to get out a little early, and then we'll just deal with the Eric Menendez jury. And on Thursday, for both juries, we will not need you here at all. So you might get your pens and your notebooks out and write all this down, because I'm giving you some information that we haven't put in writing yet, since it's just been the subject of our discussion at the sidebar here. All right, let's go through it once more. Today is the Tuesday, the 27th. Tomorrow is Wednesday, the 28th. And we'll have the Lyle Menendez jury back in the morning tomorrow. The Eric Menendez jury comes in at 1:30 tomorrow. Report next door to Department O at 1:30. The Eric Menendez jury, Department O, Wednesday at 1:30. Thursday, neither jury will be here. So on Thursday, the 29th of July, neither jury will be present. Now going to Friday. Friday, we'll start first with the Eric Menendez jury, and we'll have you here at 9 o'clock. So the Eric Menendez jury will be here at 9 o'clock on Friday. And the Lyle Menendez jury is to report back at 10:30 on Friday. So when you report back, we might still be in session dealing with the Eric Menendez jury on Friday. So if you would go back to Department O next door so we could check you in and make sure you're all there before you have you come back. I'll give you a reminder of all this tomorrow. The important thing right now is just remember when to come back tomorrow so that we have you all back. And then when you're here tomorrow, I'll give you again the information regarding Friday. Tomorrow, the Lyle Menendez jury here at 9 o'clock, the Eric Menendez jury here at 1:30. Thursday, nobody is here. There are matters the lawyers and I will discuss. And then Friday, as I've said, the Eric Menendez jury at 9 o'clock, the Lyle Menendez jury at 10:30. And that's the schedule, and I'll remind you of it tomorrow. I'll be excusing the Lyle Menendez jury at 4:30 or so when we're finished today. The Eric Menendez jury I'll be excusing now and having you come back tomorrow at 1:30. But to both juries, whether I'm excusing you now or at the end of the day here, again, let me remind you not to look at or read or listen to any of the news coverage about this case. Do not talk to anybody about the case, and do not put yourself in a situation where you'll overhear what anybody has to say about the case. You must make your decision based only on the evidence presented to you in the courtroom and my instructions on the law. All right, any questions at all right now as far as the schedule for anybody? Yes, sir.
Your Honor, I would request that I need either Wednesday or Friday. I need to be out here by 3:30. One of those 2 days.
Okay, well, we'll try to accommodate you. If you can rearrange your schedule for Thursday, it certainly would help us more than anything else.
I've been trying all week.
Okay, keep working on it, because Thursday is obviously the best day, since no jury has to be here on Thursday. All right, anybody else with any questions? Okay, as far as the Eric Menendez jury, then we'll see you back here tomorrow at 1:30. And as far as the Lyle Menendez jury is concerned, the lawyers tell me they have a short matter they want to discuss. So if you would go back into the jury room, I apologize. And it'll be a very short period of time. Go in the jury room first, because first let me see how long it is. And if it looks like it'll be a while, I'll let you take a little break and get out of the jury room. All right, the jurors have left. As far as the Lyle Menendez jury is concerned, counsel, what is it that you wanted to discuss before the testimony of Mr. Stevens?
No, I believe there are 4 areas to which the defense has objections that we could not work out. The first is the reference by Lyle Menendez to Mr. Lyle Menendez to Mr. Stevens about his description of the man, Mr. Whitkin, who had erased the computer and was the guy. The second reference is the discussion with Glen Stevens where he said there are only two people.
Can I ask you to turn on your mic there? There have been complaints that your voices aren't being picked up when you speak and don't have those mics on. So it applies to both sides there. If you can keep those mics on, unless you're having a private conversation there, otherwise your voices aren't being heard. Yes.
Okay. The second, does the clerk have the first one?
Yes.
The second issue is the statement, which I think I mentioned in the opening statement about if the police get their hands on those tapes, I'm blank.
Yes.
And the other one is that he told Mr. I'm sorry, Ms. Abramson speaking. The other one was the Porsche versus Alfa Romeo that Lyle Menendez expressed to Glen Stevens that he'd always wanted a Porsche, but all he got was an Alfa Romeo. And the fourth thing is, but he only got an Alfa Romeo. And the last, there's two more. One is
I
that,
don't understand that. He wanted a Porsche, but only got an Alfa Romeo. He bought a Porsche.
no, his parents gave him the Alfa Romeo.
Oh.
And then after they were deceased, he then got his car. The other is that Mr. Stevens can testify that they went shopping and that Mr. Menendez spent a great deal of money on clothes in a shopping mall, in excess, I think, of $10,000. And the last one was, let me look at the grand jury testimony real quickly so I can.
Right, that's four. So you said there were four.
I said there were four. Miss Lansing just added one. Just that Lyle expressed to Mr. Stevens that his father had been upset with him in a general sense because of his poor performance at Princeton. And that was, those are the five things. I'm sorry, Your Honor.
All right, what is the objections by the defense?
Your Honor, with regard to the characterization of Mr. Whitkin, the little Jewish guy comment, Mrs. Bazanich elicited that from Mr. Stevens at the grand jury, used it in her closing argument to the grand jury twice, used it in her opening statement here. It's our position that it's an attempt to demonstrate some sort of anti-Semitic quality with regard to Mr. Menendez, which is both unfair and inaccurate. And it is totally unnecessary. There's no dispute about who it is who came to work on the computer. A check was written to him. There are documents supporting it. We're not going to be taking the position that it was anybody other than Mr. Whitkin. So I think it is a gratuitous, inflammatory statement, which she likes to use over and over again, and it adds absolutely nothing to the case itself.
Right, I don't find it to be inflammatory. It's a rather innocuous phrase and is descriptive, apparently, of Mr. Whitkin. Is that correct? He is.
He is quite obviously Jewish because he wears a yarmulke at all times. And he, I mean, I can't say he's little because he's bigger than I am. So, I mean, but.
All right. But that was the description provided by Mr. Menendez
Yes,
to Mr. Stevens.
Yes, that's correct.
But it's not a fact that is at issue. The fact that Mr. Whitkin is Jewish or not Jewish has nothing to do with
Right.
this case.
I understand that. Go ahead.
And the only issue is whether he is in fact the person who came and worked on the computer, and we're not disputing that. And although you may not find it inflammatory, I think the fact that Mrs. Bazanich used it twice in her closing argument before the grand jury, 2 sentences in a row, and used it again in her opening statement indicates that she thinks that it may push some people's buttons. And I don't think that there's any need for it under 352. I think the potential for its prejudicial impact outweighs its probative value.
All right. As I said, when the issue arose during opening statement, it is an innocuous statement. It is a description provided by the defendant to the witness and was part of the conversation the defendant had with the witness and is not inflammatory and is reflective of a description that corresponds to Mr. Whitkin and describes him and is probative of that. And whether the defense now doesn't dispute these matters is not the only issue, but the issue of whether the defense, without this sort of information and other corroborative evidence that the prosecution has, would have, in fact, disputed these things. So just because you don't dispute them now doesn't mean that the people are not entitled to prove these facts. And the fact that the defendant spoke about the computer individual and described him in such a fashion that corresponds with the individual is probative, and therefore under 352 of the Evidence Code, I find the probative value substantially outweighs any prejudicial effect. All right, the next one deals with the defendant referring to if the police find the tapes, then he is paraphrasing it, in a whole lot of trouble. Right? Yeah.
It's our position that partly because of the need that everybody feels to paraphrase it, that this reflects negatively on Lyle using this language, and that's one of the reasons why this statement is being elicited. Secondly, I think there is no dispute about the fact that Dr. Oziel had indicated that he was making notes of a confession, and I think this adds nothing to the case whatsoever. Obviously, if someone thinks that there are notes made of a confession to a crime of this nature, you wouldn't want anybody to get their hands on them. I don't think that that adds anything to the case at all, and I think it's an opportunity to merely introduce language which is prejudicial. So our objection would be under 352 once again.
Well, again, this was language used by the defendant. He chose the language as he chose the description of Mr. Witkin, and the nature of his selection of words is a reflection of the strength of his feelings about the subject in relationship to the disclosure of Dr. Oziel's tapes. And the prosecution has earlier indicated that this is offered to show consciousness of guilt on the part of the defendant, that he was preoccupied with the fact that Oziel had these tapes, and if he turned them over to the authorities, it would be to Mr. Menendez's detriment.
I think that if he were now saying he wasn't guilty of, or wasn't responsible for having committed these acts, it would be different. But since he has indicated that he is in fact responsible for these killings.
No, he's saying he's not responsible for the killings. He's saying that he might have pulled a trigger, but he's not legally responsible for the murders, the deaths.
Right. What we're talking about is the fact that he has acknowledged responsibility for the deaths. Now, what the character of that act is going to be up to the jury to decide.
Well, if
we're not disputing, regardless of what this court does, feeling guilty about something that you've done, regardless of what any court will call it, is a separate issue. And that's what we're talking about with consciousness of guilt. It's an emotional state of mind, or emotional state of being, as well as a state of mind. And so it's our position that that doesn't add anything to the fact.
All right. Well, as I've indicated before, I believe that this is relevant probative evidence reflecting on the defendant's state of mind and statements made prior to his arrest, reflecting upon his concern that if statements made to Dr. Oziel were revealed, they would incriminate him. And this certainly reflects on his state of mind and consciousness of guilt, and his relevant evidence, probative evidence. And under Section 352 of the Evidence Code, its probative value substantially outweighs any prejudicial effect. And the next has to do with the automobiles, one versus another. The defendant apparently complaining to his friend about having been provided with one type of vehicle and really wanting another.
Part of our objection on that, Your Honor, is that this is something that we heard about yesterday for the first time, and I'm not sure of the circumstances under which this information came up or what the details are about it. He'd never mentioned that to anybody before, despite the fact that he spent a great deal of time with Detective Zoller in the past and has conversed with him 8 to 10 times that we can document. And so for the first time yesterday, he comes up with this statement, and he did not even know Lyle at the time that he got the Alpha Romeo. It was a graduation present from his parents in 1986.
Well, that gives you fertile ground for cross-examination, but that's doesn't prohibit the prosecution from introducing it. All right, as far as the fourth, purchasing of clothing, haven't we already had some testimony about that by Mr. Wincowski?
Yes, Your Honor.
Describing the purchase of clothing. So what is this that's any different?
I believe that he testified at the grand jury that in his presence he saw Lyle purchase over $11,000 worth of clothing, and yet We've never been provided with any specifics of what he bought, where he bought it, when he bought it, how he paid for it, what store, how he comes up with that figure. There's just this general figure out of nowhere in terms of the amount of clothing, and there's never been any discovery provided of when and how and where this took place and who was around at that time. So it's information that is unsubstantiated in any form.
Well, again, that goes to the weight of the evidence, not to its admissibility. As far as Lyle Menendez saying that his father had treated him unjustly.
Referring to page 150 of the grand jury testimony, there's a question which says, did Lyle indicate to you anything background on why his father may have been upset with him? The answer is actually no, not that I recall. It was only because of his poor record at Princeton, having been kicked out for a year, and just a general poor attitude was my impression. And so it's our position that this is just a conclusion that's formed on the part of Mr. Stevens, and there's no factual basis for it.
All right. Well, any opinion evidence such as that would normally be inadmissible unless there is a specific factual foundation for it in statements attributed to the defendant or other extrinsic evidence. So just the conclusion by the witness is not admissible. Going back to the reference to the tapes, and if the police found the tapes, it's my impression that the defense is attacking Dr. Oziel's credibility and what he says in his testimony relating to what it was that the defendant told him. Is that correct?
Some of it.
I understand you're not going to accept every word that Dr. Oziel says as true.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But the fundamental part with regard to the confession to having killed their parents, we are not disputing.
Not the fact of killing the parents, but the why and the wherefore of it, you are disputing.
Yes.
That's most of what Dr. Oziel would deal with in his testimony. Isn't that true?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, again, the defendant's statement that he's concerned about those tapes coming into the possession of the police and the strength of his emotional reaction if they did get them is indicative of a state of mind that is of a person who, not just a person who admitted killing parents in self-defense or for some other legally justified or excusable reason, but for a reason that was not justified and was illegal. And that is why that evidence is admissible and relevant.
Your Honor, the only problem with that analysis is there is no indication that those tapes were ever played for Lyle Menendez, that he ever knew what it was Oziel said in those tapes, other than the fact that he knew that there was information indicating that he killed their parents. I don't think Dr. Oziel's ever taken the position that he played those tapes for them or revealed the contents of them to them at all.
Well, anyone looking at it rationally would assume that whatever Dr. Oziel recorded of his interviews with the defendants would be reflective of what occurred during those interviews. And if there was a concern about the contents of his notes, whether done orally or in writing, then that's for the jury to evaluate as far as why there was such a concern and whether it reflects on the defendant's state of mind.
But if you are dealing with the possibility that there is something on the tapes that is particularly troubling to the mind, the court, I'm sure, remembers the fact that two of those tapes are privileged. And so this comment could be reflecting on something that was in the privileged tapes.
Well, it could be, but the nature of the statement and in reference to the police would certainly indicate that the concern had to do with disclosures of things that would cause Lyle Menendez to feel that he was going to be arrested and prosecuted. So I think it's admissible evidence, and it's up to the jury to evaluate it to decide what value to place on it. All right, anything else before the jury comes out?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, is Mr. Stevens available?
Yes.
Okay, let's get the jury out. Well, first, let's get rid of the team for Eric Menendez and Mr. Eric Menendez, since he is not involved in this.
Some other way to say get rid of.
I just drew a blank. I couldn't come up with anything else. Good afternoon. All right, the Jurors are all in the jury box. People may call their next witness.
People call Glen Stevens to the stand.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you may give in the cause of the before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please take the stand and state your name.
Glen Stevens,
Spell your last name.
Stevens.
All right, you may conduct your direct examination.
Thank you. Mr. Stevens, did you recently graduate from Princeton University?
Yes, I did.
And in what year did you start at the university, please?
In 1988.
And so was your freshman semester in the fall of 1988?
Yes, that's correct.
Did you graduate from high school in June of 88?
Yes, that's correct.
And in the spring of 1989, did you meet Lyle Menendez?
Yes,
Do you see him in here in court?
yes, I do.
What's he presently wearing?
Striped white shirt.
Referring to the defendant at counsel table.
Thank you. Mr. Stevens, at some point, did you consider yourself to be Lyle Menendez's best friend?
Well, yeah, I considered him to be my best friend. I'm not sure that the feeling was mutual.
Okay, but he was your best friend.
Yes, yes.
And about what month was it in 1989 that you recall first meeting him?
It was February, I believe, when he returned to campus.
And when did the spring semester start that year?
It's usually the first week in February.
And when does the fall semester normally end? Before Christmas?
No, we have exams after Christmas.
All right, and that's continuing through the 4 years that you were there?
Yes,
When you first met Lyle Menendez, where were you living?
I was living on campus in my dorm room.
Was it a specific hall that you lived in?
Yeah, I believe it was 1937 hall.
And do you remember what hall Mr. Menendez was living in?
Yes, in Gauss Hall.
At the time that you first met him, did you also meet a man named Donovan Goudreau?
Yes, soon thereafter.
Were you also friends with Mr. Goudreau?
Yes,
And during the period of times that you were friends with Lyle Menendez, did you spend a lot of time with him together?
yes.
Now, the spring semester of 1989 ended about when?
It's usually the last week in May or the first week in June.
And during that summer, did you see Lyle Menendez?
No, I did not.
Where did you spend the summer of 1989?
At my house in Freehold, New Jersey with my parents.
Did you learn sometime after August the 20th of 1989 that Lyle Menendez's parents had been killed?
Yes, I did.
Do you remember how it was you were notified of this?
Yes, I had a friend whose mother had worked for Mr. Menendez actually had worked at RCA in New York City, and she had heard at work the next day that the parents had been killed, and her son called me to tell me.
Did you see Mr. Menendez at the end of the spring semester? Were you still friends with him at the end of the spring
Yes.
semester? During the summer, did you have any contact with him at all?
Yes, he called my house a few times, on a few occasions.
Then the next contact you would have had was to learn of the deaths of the parents. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, prior to learning of the deaths of the parents, had you ever met at either one of them?
No.
Did you ever go to California and visit Lyle Menendez at home in California after you made his acquaintance in February of 1989?
Not while the parents were living.
After you found out that they were deceased, what's the next time that you saw or heard from Lyle Menendez?
At the funeral service in Princeton.
Okay, could you tell me what that was? And it was a funeral or a memorial?
It was a memorial service. There was a memorial service, a wake, and then the burial.
Right. Which portion did you go to?
All three.
And where was the memorial service?
The memorial service was in the Princeton University Chapel.
And was the wake outside of the university?
Yes, it was at a funeral home right there in town.
And then you also attended the burial?
Yes, that's correct.
And at the memorial service, did you see Lyle Menendez?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did you have any conversation with him?
Not at the memorial service. I did at the wake at the funeral home.
Did you travel by yourself from the memorial service to the wake?
Well,
did you travel with Mr. Menendez?
From the memorial service to the wake? No, I don't recall so.
All right. Why did you go to the memorial service?
Well, he was a friend of mine, and he was coming into town I figured it was I should be there.
Had you spoken to him on the phone between the time that you learned of his parents' deaths and the time of the memorial service?
No, I called and tried to speak to him, but Mr. Menendez's secretary was taking all of their calls, the boys' calls.
Do you remember what day of the week it was that you went to the memorial service?
No.
Had school started by then?
I don't believe so.
And generally, the fall semester at Princeton University, when does it start for people who are not freshmen?
The second week of September, I believe. It's usually the week after Labor Day.
Did you have any conversation with Mr. Lyle Menendez at the wake?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did he say something to you about how he felt about what had happened?
Yes, we spoke for a little while. I had asked him, how he was doing, how he was getting along, and he had a response that I remember that stuck out of my mind.
Okay. What did he tell you?
He said, well, I've been waiting so long to be in this position that I'm well prepared for it.
Now, when he said well prepared for the position, did you understand what position he was referring to?
Well, I took it to mean being the man of the family now, being in charge.
Did you offer him consolation when you first spoke to him?
Yeah, I believe so.
The normal things you say to people who've just lost.
Yes.
Okay. Did you notice that he was wearing any kind of watch at this time?
Yes, I noticed that he was wearing a Rolex.
Had you ever seen him wearing a Rolex prior to, when you knew him in the spring of 1989?
No.
Did he say anything to you about the Rolex the first time that you noticed it on him?
Oh, I commented on it, and he told me that it was his father's, and that he was wearing it.
And when he made this comment to you, was that at the wake?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Did you later learn from Lyle Menendez that in fact he had purchased the Rolex?
Yes, that's correct.
Do you know about when it was after the wake that you learned that?
No, I can't recall.
Was it a matter of weeks, months?
It was probably soon thereafter, but I can't say definitively.
After the memorial service, the wake and the burial, did you begin to spend time with Lyle Menendez again?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, during the spring of 1989, how much time during a normal day would you say that you spent with Lyle Menendez?
A few hours.
Now, could you give us a brief description of the class schedule that the students have at Princeton? Do you go to class from 8 to 5, or how does
No,
that
on the average, you have about 3 50-minute classes every day, and the rest of the day you pretty much have to yourself for studying or sports or whatnot.
Okay, so approximately 3 hours of class per day, and then the rest of the day is left to your own devices.
Yes, that's correct.
What was the bond that you had with Lyle Menendez when you first met him in the spring of 1989?
Well, it was immediately obvious that both of us were not very happy at Princeton University, and we sort of had a bonding experience in that we felt that the university was a little bit too structured and that we didn't get along with most of the Princeton type people.
And when you renewed your friendship with him after the death of his parents, were you as close to him then as you had been in the spring?
I would say so.
And did you spend a lot of time with him?
Yes.
Now, if in fact the university didn't start until the second week of September, between the time of the memorial service and the start of school, did you spend a lot of time with Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
Do you remember that he was being guarded by bodyguards at a certain period of time?
Yes.
And when and how did you first become aware that he was being guarded?
I imagine, if I recall correctly, I remember being at the Baralt's house one day, Aunt Terry's house, and sitting there, and Lyle, some bodyguards came into the house ahead of Lyle, checked out the house, and then Lyle walked in. And I think that's the first time that I actually saw them.
Okay, now, when you talk about Aunt Terry, could you tell us who she is, please?
Terry Baralt is Lyle's aunt. It's Jose's sister, I believe.
And prior to, after the memorial service, was that the first time you'd ever known her, or did you know her in the spring of 1989?
I knew her in the spring of 1989. Right.
And how was it that you knew her?
We went over to the house very often and sat with her and spoke with her, ate there on occasion.
Did she act like someone's typical aunt?
Yes.
Okay. And how many times a week or a month would you say you saw her in the spring of 1989?
That would be difficult to say. I don't know. We probably went there maybe once a week, once every other week. It was sporadic.
When you say we went there, aside from yourself and Lyle Menendez, did anyone else ever go over to her house?
Yes, often Hayden Rogers would also go. Remember an occasion here or there where Greg Guest might have went as well.
And Greg Guest and Hayden Rogers were also students at Princeton University in the
Yes.
spring of 1989?
Yes.
Now, referring back now to the fall after the memorial service, I believe you indicated the first time you noticed the bodyguards was at Aunt Terry's house. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Did Lyle ever say anything to you about why he wanted bodyguards?
Oh, well, there was the whole idea of that maybe the mafia had been responsible for this murder, and that I just understood that he was fearing for his own person.
At some point after you became aware that he was being guarded by bodyguards, were you aware of the fact that he went to Los Angeles for a day?
Yes.
Okay, did you know that before or after the fact of the trip?
I can't recall. I know that I knew it after. I'm not sure if I knew beforehand that he was going out to LA.
Were you spending time with him before the fact of the trip?
Yes.
After the trip, did he tell you why he'd gone to Los Angeles?
Yes.
Okay, what did he say?
He told me that his Uncle Carlos had found a file in the computer that had 3 headings on it. One of them said Menendez, one of them said list, I believe, and one of them said will. And that he went out there to try and open the files and read what was in them.
Now, when he told you the term will, did you understand that to be the name of a document or somebody's name, like Will being short for William?
The name of the document, the
Okay,
family will.
like a last will and
Yes.
testament. Okay, did he tell you why he wanted to access the computer?
He wanted to read what was in the will because he knew that his father was drafting a new will, and he wanted to see if he could read what was in there.
Did he tell you the results of his search?
Yes.
What did he tell you?
They opened the files and found nothing legible inside. They couldn't be opened. They couldn't be accessed for some reason. And he told the computer expert that he had hired just to erase the contents.
Did he tell you why he wanted the contents erased?
Yes.
What did he say?
He said, well, my father wasn't very happy with me at the time. And since the will that was found gave me and my brother everything, I had nothing to lose by erasing this one. I'm not sure if I would have been in it.
Were you aware of whether or not Lyle Menendez had any computer skills when you were friends with him during this period of time?
I'm sure he had basic word processing skills at Princeton, I believe.
I'm going to object unless there's a showing of personal knowledge.
Objection sustained. The answer is stricken.
Okay. Did you ever see him work an IBM computer?
Macintosh, I believe.
But
I'm not sure.
Okay. Now, when Lyle Menendez told you about erasing the will, did he say anything about the person who had done the erasure?
Yes.
What did he say?
He said that he had found a little Jewish guy, a computer expert, who he didn't think anybody would be able to find.
During the period of time that you spent with Lyle Menendez before the start of school and even after the start of school, did you and he ever go shopping together?
Yes.
Okay. Could you tell us what you went shopping for?
Clothes, lots of things. Are you speaking about in the spring of 1989?
No, I'm sorry. If I said that, I misspoke. After the death of the parents.
We went shopping very often for a lot of things.
Well, since you brought it up before that time, before the parents had died, had you ever gone shopping with him while you were both together in the spring of '89 before his parents were deceased?
Not that I recall.
Right. Did he ever buy you things or buy dinner or anything in the spring of 1989 before his parents were deceased?
Not that I recall.
After the memorial service, you went shopping?
Yes, very often.
Okay. What did you shop for?
A Porsche, real estate, 2 condominiums and a patio home, clothes, things of that nature.
Now, in the spring of 1989, I keep jumping back and forth, and if you're unclear, just correct me. Were you aware of whether or not Lyle Menendez owned an automobile before his parents' death?
Yes.
What kind of automobile did he own?
I believe he had an Alfa Romeo at home. I'm not sure it was on campus.
Okay, did he indicate to you that he had an Alfa Romeo at home?
Yes.
Did he ever indicate whether or not he was pleased with having an Alfa Romeo versus another kind of car?
Well, he sometimes referred to it as and I apologize, a piece of shit, and that he had expressed an interest in Porsches.
And as this was before the death of his parents?
Yes.
After the death of his parents, you went and drove?
Yes, I went with him on test drive of the Porsche.
Did you ever look for any other car aside from Porsches?
Not that I recall.
During this period of time that you were spending time with him, did he always wear the Rolex watch?
Well, he had 2 of them.
Oh, okay. What was the other one?
He had a gold Rolex President's watch, and he also had a platinum Submariner diving watch.
All right. So whenever you were with him, did he have one of the two watches on?
Yes.
Did you ever wear one of the watches?
Well, that was later on, yes. When he was wearing one, he had a Submariner and lost it and went and replaced it, purchased another one. And so he said at that time, well, when I'm wearing one of them, you wear the other one. That way I know where it is. I won't lose it.
Okay. Do you know during what period of time it was that he lost the Submariner?
He lost it in the fall of my sophomore year around Princeton somewhere. In somebody's room it was left and went back and it was gone.
Now, the fall of your sophomore year was the fall of 1989, correct?
Correct.
And that was after his parents' death?
Yes.
So after the replacement of the Submariner, you sometimes would wear one of the watches that he wasn't wearing?
Correct.
Did you return to Princeton in the fall of 1989 and become a student again?
Yes.
And did you stay a student there and finish that semester at Princeton University?
Yes, that's correct.
And sometime after the completion of your first semester of your sophomore year, did Lyle Menendez hire you?
Yes, it was right around the beginning of my spring semester.
Had you already started your spring semester?
Yes, that's correct.
And when he hired you, what did he hire you to do?
It wasn't exactly specific at the time. Part of it was going to be dealing with Chuck Spring Street Cafe, or Mr. Buffalo's, as it was being renamed. Part of it was just looking over real estate deals, just as a personal advisor on some investment.
What was your major at the time?
Politics.
Okay. Did you have any investment background?
Not anything formal. I had an interest in it and did some reading.
Now, I believe you've made some reference to Chuck Spring Street Cafe. Could you tell us what that was, please?
It was a local eatery in the Princeton area that specialized in buffalo wings.
Before, in the spring of 1989, before the death of the parents, had you ever been there with Lyle Menendez?
I don't recall.
Okay. After the death of the parents, did you ever go there with Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
And at some point, did he actually purchase the restaurant?
Yes.
Do you remember about what month it was in the fall of 1989 that he first expressed an interest in purchasing the restaurant?
I can't recall the month.
Was it in the fall of 1989, though?
Yes, I believe so.
Your Honor, I have here a document. I'd like to mark it as People's Next in Order, which is 54, please. And counsel, will you stipulate that this is a true and correct business record reflecting the sale of the Spring Street Cafe to Lyle Menendez?
Yes, as far as I know.
All right, at this point, the document is marked Exhibit 54.
That's correct. Thank you, Your Honor. May I approach, please?
Yes.
Well, before I approach, Mr. Stevens, were you present during any of the negotiations for the purchase of the restaurant?
Yes.
And which portions?
Some of the preliminary negotiations and also for the actual purchase.
And that would have been when the money was presented?
Yes, I believe so.
Do you remember what the purchase price was?
I believe it was $550,000.
And do you remember what the down payment was to be?
I believe $300,000.
Were you personally present when $300,000 was tendered to the owner of Chuck Spring Street?
Yes, in the form of a cashier's check or something like that, I believe.
May I approach, please?
Yes.
I'm going to show you the last page of this document, People's, Exhibit 54, and ask you if this looks familiar to you. It appears to be a copy of a check drawn in the United Jersey Bank. It's a cashier's check in the amount of $300,000.
Yes.
Okay, does that appear to be similar to what you saw?
Yes.
You didn't memorize the number of the
No.
check? Okay. Now, your employment then was to be some sort of advisor and also to work at this restaurant, is that correct?
Yes.
And did you arrive at a figure for your services?
Well, there was a basic weekly figure that was arrived at, yes.
And how much was that?
It was approximately $600 a week.
And were you to work at the restaurant as well as do the other things you've described?
Yes.
Did you in fact work at that restaurant for a period of time?
Yes.
From what period until what period?
From its purchase until probably July, the July after the arrests in 1990, I guess.
So for about 3 or 4 months after the arrest, you were still working there?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm about to go into some other things. I think this would be a good time to break.
All right. All right, we'll take a recess then, ladies and gentlemen. It's 4:30 and we'll resume tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Don't discuss this case with anyone. Don't form any opinions about it. Don't look at any of the news coverage or listen to any of the news coverage. And we'll resume tomorrow at 9 o'clock. That's it for today.
Can I be excused, Your Honor?
Hold on. Seriously. Everybody be seated until the jurors leave, please.